Hello, welcome to Convergent Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. Okay, so here in the United States, we had an election this past Tuesday. It was all the rage, all the talk of the town, and all the talk of the country for a better part of a year and a half, and definitely over the past month or couple of weeks. And of course, the U.S. is a pretty big player on the world stage, so a lot of people were paying attention to the election for president, and also what happens in our Congress. And I got to say, for all of my listeners out there in the world, it feels pretty normal living close to D.C. And going through this every 2 years for an election, 4 years for presidential elections, kind of since I've been a kid. So it kind of feels normal, but it is always interesting when people pay attention around the world. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but it's a thing. And it was a pretty solid win for Republicans and for Trump and for the MAGA movement. It was the delayed red wave. In fact, it's the MAGA red wave. Pretty much across the board, as of the last, when I last checked, maybe 30 minutes ago. Yes, Trump has won the popular vote by about 75 million, 51%, 312 electoral college votes. It looks like it's going to be a 53-47 Republican majority Senate, and House will still probably take a couple more days, maybe a week, but I think the Republicans need 5 more seats, and there's definitely a handful in play that they should win. Republican House, and then we have a conservative Supreme Court 6-3, so it's a full deck. Pretty interesting. We'll see what happens. I am really, a lot of people have mixed feelings. I had told a bunch of friends personally that this is sort of what I expected. I was telling friends and family members weeks ago it was going to be about this, and here it is. Very interesting. As listeners will know, I'm a very big fan of politics. I'm a little bit wonky, a little bit of a policy nerd. I like this stuff. It's really, really fascinating to me. I think some of it is, the politics end of it is interesting, but it's how people make decisions, why they choose certain things. So I guess maybe it's not a surprise that, in my day job, I do psychology and I'm interested in human behavior. So this is just human behavior with, in the medium of politics. So it's interesting why people would make the decisions they make. Some seemingly so, and some unassumingly. There's more unassuming, rather. So it's interesting. I started the podcast right after right in that weekend of the 2020 election. So I wasn't able to do anything with it. But in 2022, I had my good friend Ben Winegard, who's he's been on the podcast a handful of times, but he has a Ph.D. in developmental psychology and emphasis in the social psych world. So we did a kind of a post-mortem on the 2022 midterm elections. I think we did about 2 hours and change, maybe 2.5. I can't remember. And we just got into the numbers. What does it mean? What happens? In the midterms, it's all of the House seats and a handful of Senate seats, some governorships. So, much like the World Cup or the Olympics, we get a presidential election once every 4 years. So there was a presidential election, and I told Ben, I said, well, you got to come back on, and we got to do another postmortem on 2024. And he was very excited to do so. I'll be very honest. This episode clocks in at almost 3 hours, and it's the fastest 3 hours I think I've done in a long time. Obviously, I've done shorter episodes more recently, but people that have listened to the podcast for a long time will know that I'm not shy about doing very long episodes. I've done plenty of 3+ hour conversations. I love that stuff. And this was fast. I mean, him and I were talking afterwards, and I was like, man, I could have gone at least another 2 or 3 hours. There were so many things to cover. So it's a fast 3 hours when you listen to it. Yeah. So Ben and I are good friends. I'll say that him and I, we're always trying to find something we disagree with, because we literally have, I think, the exact same political opinions on most things. I've rarely found anything we disagree with on terms of policy or politics. So it makes, surprisingly, for a really good conversation, because we're able to kind of push and pull, and we have, I think, some pretty good. We're both moderate liberals, so we both have always voted Democrat, but I think we try to set a good example. It's just kind of our nature. We have a kind of moderate temperament by nature, but we spend a lot of time criticizing Democrats and the left, and but we also spend a lot of time criticizing Trump and Republicans. We can say what they do well, even if we don't like it or agree with it, and the same for Democrats. So I think we're both really, he'll say one thing and I'll pick it up and I'll run with it a little bit more, and vice versa. And so it's really just great conversation to do that. It's not talking to someone and they're saying, well, what about this? Or, fighting on this one particular thing. And so in these kind of issues, it really does, I think, make for actually really good, fruitful conversation. So it was just such a pleasure. Ben currently his day job is assistant professor of psychology at Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. As I mentioned, he has a Ph.D. in developmental psychology, also a background in social psychology, and his interests are in human progress, polarization, and political issues. As I also mentioned, he's been on the podcast twice before, so he was one of my very, very early guests back in 2020, episode 3, which is entitled, "Is Pragmatism the Real Progressivism?" I haven't listened to it in a while, but the last time I remember listening to it, I remember kind of standing by it. I think a lot of the things that we say in there still hold, for better or for worse. And then, as I mentioned earlier, episode 179, we did entitled "Red Wave: Thoughts on the 2022 U.S. Midterm Elections." And so now we are here, and the MAGA red wave of 2024. So we talk about everything in this conversation. We talk about our kind of overall thoughts on the election. As I mentioned, we're both kind of political nerds, so we do a deep dive into the results, and we examine the results. We spend a good part of the first part of the conversation talking about the massive county shifts nationwide. And one of the interesting features here is the county shifts in New York City are quite incredible. We talk about them in swing states. We talked about in liberal pockets. We talk about it in urban areas, in rural, suburban. It's just all over the place, nationwide, and why that might be. We talk about Trump as a political force for, it's going to be 12 years, at least with this second term. That's a long time. And we talk about other kind of Trump-lite candidates and how they're not always successful. It really does seem that people like Trump, not Trump-like candidates, which is interesting, especially about the future of where this goes. We talk about split ticket voting. So many people, for example, Trump won all 7 swing states, but in, I believe, 5 of them, the Democrats won in the Senate race, and they took about the same amount of votes. So it's very interesting what's going on there with this split ticket voting. Who's that voter that's voting Trump for president and Slotkin for senator in Michigan? It's very, very interesting dynamics here. We talk about the current state of MAGA and what the sort of future of that might be. We spend a good amount of time talking about Latinos and how they're voting and how there's a big shift. It has been, Democrats have been hemorrhaging Latino votes since 2016, and it is progressively worse for them every single year. And there's just they are tone deaf, and they have not figured out how to talk to a massive voting bloc Latinos make up at least 12% of the voting bloc and about 22% of the U.S. population. Fastest growing minority in the U.S. and a big voting bloc. And so they are losing terribly with Latinos, and that's a big problem for them. So we talk all about that, why Latinos vote for Republicans, why they've been voting for Trump, and is there anything Democrats can do about that? We, of course, talk about gender, and specifically we talk about, white women overwhelmingly are voting for Trump, over 50%. Even Latin women are almost at 40% now. Just across the board, what's going on there? I mean, we hear all this conversation about reproductive freedom and all of these things, but there's still a sizable portion of the voting bloc that's women that are voting for Trump. So what's going on there? We talk about the various ballot measures. So we talk about recreational marijuana, talk about abortion, talk about voting rights. These were the three major categories that were on the ballot this year. We talk about Trump's second term and what does that look like? Who's going to be in his cabinet? What's he going to do about immigration and this, as he quote said, the largest deportation in the U.S. history, tariffs, what's he doing foreign affairs wise? He's said a lot of things. He's had a lot of rhetoric in this election and just historically. And so does he hold to that? He's got the popular vote, electoral college, full Congress. He's got a mandate. In theory, that's what the majority of Americans voted for. So how hard is he going to go on that? And I suspect, like Ben, it's not going to be like the first term. I think he's going to go hard on a lot of this stuff. And that's a bit concerning and alarming for some. So we'll see. And so we just talk about what the next 4 years, a second term for Trump is going to look like and what that could mean. We also spend time talking about how Democrats, reset their agenda. What are they going to do when it really does look like the Obama years were becoming more and more of an anomaly? It does look like Biden's narrow win, without COVID, probably wouldn't have happened. So Democrats aren't winning more recently. They didn't win in 2016. It looks like 2020 was because of COVID. 2022 was okay. And then now they haven't won here. So what are they doing? It does seem like the only block that they have, the only thing they've won is upper middle class educated elites. And that is not a large percentage of the population. And you can't win elections just talking to those folks in the majorities. So what do they need to do? How can they kind of reset their agenda? How can they talk to kind of working class folks all around the country? But as this election showed, it's not just in, the Midwest or middle America. It's in urban places. It's in suburbs. It's, with Latinos. It's with, different types of populations. So they have to really, do a hard reset and say, okay, this isn't working. What are we going to do? So we talk about that and many more topics. I mean, again, this was a fabulous conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I think Ben has such a good pulse on these things, very moderate, willing to change his mind. He'll speak cautiously if he's unsure about something or if it's just fresh thoughts. I also try to do the same. And some of this is provisional data, exit polls, things like that. So, as time goes on, we'll see how this stuff firms up a little bit more and, maybe a few things change and, amend those kind of statements. But right now, it looks fascinating politically in the United States, and who knows where it's going to go in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 4 years. So it'll be very interesting to see. As always, you can find this conversation and all other conversations at convergingdialogues.substack.com. It's also on YouTube. So if you like this conversation, previous conversations, other topics, the best thing you can do is just share it online, wherever you're at. online, share it with your friends, tell people word of mouth. All of that is really the best thing for the podcast to grow. And if you really like this, and there's a lot of podcasts out there, there's a lot of people talking. But if you like what I'm doing here and the people I'm talking to, it really, really helps when you share it and post it and all that great stuff. So that's much appreciated. And now I bring you Benjamin Winegard. I'm here with Benjamin Winegard. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Benjamin Winegard, and I am an assistant professor of psychology at Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, the great show me state.
There it is. Yes, of course. You and I are good friends. We've been friends for, 4 or 5 years. And you've been on the podcast before, and we've talked about a variety of different things, usually stuff around politics, population groups, moderate liberalism, elections, things like that. So we did a nice podcast on the 2022 midterm elections here in the U.S.
Yes.
And that was interesting. So now we're back at it 2 years later for the 2024 presidential election. Lots to get into. The way I don't know about you, the way I'm conceptualizing this is the delayed red wave we thought we were going to see in 2022. It just happened 2 years later, and here we are. So it certainly was red all over the place. And for folks that voted red, they're very happy about that probably. And for folks that didn't, they're not so happy. So yeah, just tell me, your overall thoughts. We'll get into it, but what is your overall thoughts of the election? You can talk about the run up, the primaries, the Biden dropping out, and then the actual election itself and the results. But what's your overall, pulse on this election?
Yeah, I think the most kind of bird's eye view for me is it's the second, as Derek Thompson called it, the second COVID election. There's a real anti-incumbent mood. In fact, this chart that's kind of been making the rounds on Twitter shows that this is the first time since, I believe, 1905 that every incumbent party has lost vote share. So that's just let that sink in. Every incumbent party in 2024 lost vote share. And again, like you can look at this, it's as far back as they have data. And so you can see there's just this real, I think mostly it's inflation. The inflation in especially 21, 22 into 23. In the United States, it peaked at 9.1%.
Yeah.
People psychologically really despise inflation. It plays into loss aversion. And just to give people some kind of an understanding of how bad it is for incumbents, using Morning Consult data, you can look at the approval rating of leaders around the world. So Giorgia Meloni at 39% is one of the more popular.
This is now, the woman in Italy, yeah?
Yeah, the leader of Italy. And then Emmanuel Macron at 19, Justin Trudeau, 26, Joe Biden was 38, Olaf Scholz is at 18%, the South Korean leaders at 15. I mean, there really is, and we've seen this with the elections as well, whether it's a right-leaning party, a left-leaning party, they've been getting smashed. Obviously the Tories suffered a historic defeat in Britain. So to me, it's just the anti-incumbent mood would lead you to predict that the Democratic Party would do poorly. that,
Mm.
and we saw this, that Biden's approval rating is very low. People think that the country is going in the wrong direction and they really wanted change. And I think, could you possibly have gotten around that by selecting a Democrat who was not associated with the administration? Maybe, but Harris is saddled with the Biden legacy.
Yeah.
She was Biden's vice president. And I will say the Trump campaign, and JD Vance was especially good at this. Every time they talked about anything, they didn't talk about it was Joe Biden. They said it's the Harris Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
They really, really tied her in with all of the policies that were unpopular with the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be like the largest, to me, largest scale. Is like you were really swimming against a strong tide. There were strong headwinds against the Democratic Party. And then we do have some data for just focusing in the United States and taking this, more locally.
Mm-hmm.
There was this polling that was done on top reasons that voters gave for not supporting Harris. And among all voters, swing voters, black voters, swing voters who ended up selecting Trump or voting for Trump, and Latino voters, there was a consensus that there were really three major factors. One, inflation was too high. Two, too many immigrants crossed the border. And three, that they perceived Harris as being too focused on cultural issues rather than being focused on the middle class. So again, essentially the anti-incumbent, there's inflation, we're hurting, prices are too high, eggs have gone up, 200% or whatever it is. Housing prices went up dramatically, interest rates are high. And then in addition to that, immigration was a real problem with the Biden administration. And, Harris, we don't have to quibble about semantics, but she was appointed like the quote unquote border czar, and is therefore closely associated with the Biden administration policies there. And the Democratic Party has a brand problem in that they're perceived to be left on cultural issues, quote unquote, woke. I don't think Harris ran a particularly woke campaign, but she kind of codes culturally left. She's a black woman who's a San Francisco liberal, and she definitely didn't lean hard against that. So she wasn't, leaning into the wokeism, wasn't leaning into trans issues, but she didn't repudiate it either.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the kind of overall take that I would have.
Yeah, I'll continue with that. Just out through Associated Press, the two biggest issues that people stated were important for them in this election on a national scale. It breaks down a little bit differently, by critical states, but generally, economy at 39%. That's number one, and then immigration is there at 20%. And then I'll just throw this in here. Abortion was 11%. I'll come back to that in a minute. So you have the two biggest issues here for folks in the United States at the moment. Economy, so as you're saying, inflation, price of goods, supply chain issues maybe from a couple years ago, things like gas, things like that. Again, these aren't what, obviously that people have talked about, presidents don't control the price of gas and stuff. But for people on a day-to-day basis, that's what they see, that's what they feel, that's the state of the economy. You can look at all the great policies and all the metrics and all these things, but for people, it appears that way. And then immigration at 20%. Now just look here from 2020, obviously COVID was a big deal, 41% in 2020. But would you believe it? Number two was the economy at 28%.
Yes.
So, you have, a 10% increase. Of course, we've kind of, sort of got back to normal since the pandemic. But those are the two biggest issues, right? Those are typically, if I were to go back and look in 2016, we all remember that. one of the biggest issues in 2016 was immigration. That was the biggest thing. That was, or was one of the biggest issues. So
Yes.
there's a consistent trend here. So let's just kind of get a lay of the land. As of right now, we're talking on Saturday after the election. Kamala has 226 electoral college votes. Trump has 301. They haven't officially called Arizona, but once that ticks over, which it will,
Yes.
he'll have 312, I believe. And when we're looking at popular vote, Kamala's got 47.8%. Again, we're still counting, but that's 70,259,000. And then Trump has 74,173,000. Again, still counting, and he's at 50.5%. So he's got over half the country on the popular vote. Moving to the Senate, we're at 46 for the Dems, and we're at 52. Yes, 52 for Republicans. So they have a solid over 50 majority.
Though, is that with the Casey call, or have they not officially called that yet?
I think that's without the Casey call officially.
Okay, so it'll probably be 53.
53. And I think they still haven't called the Gallego race in Arizona, which is interesting. But in all likelihood, this looks like a 47 Democrat, 53 Republican Senate. Republicans have the majority in the Senate. And finally, in the House, close. It's pretty much very tight as it is now. But at the moment, there's 213 Republicans congressional House seats and 204 for Democrats. Of course, you need 218 for the majority. Interesting here, Democrats have flipped 5 and Republicans have flipped 6. And there's still, I think, about a dozen or maybe 20 seats left still to call. So Republicans have 5 there. They're favored in most of them. They should have majority of the House. So you have a full red MAGA wave. You have the presidency, you have the Senate, you have the House, and you have a conservative 6-3 Supreme Court.
Yes. So
what do we make of this? What went wrong here? What's going? So the economy we talked about. Maybe we talk about other things, but there's just red everywhere. There's red shift everywhere.
Yes, this is what I think this is particularly important. So if you compare this to Trump's victory in 2016, it's very different. In 2016, first of all, he doesn't win the popular vote, which I think is important for perceived legitimacy. And also you could view 2016 as something of a fluke. Really what happens there is Trump is particularly adept at turning out these low propensity non-college whites, like rural whites, especially in the upper Midwest. And you see this. So when you look at the counties where Trump gained vote share in 2016, there's a real educational gradient, right? It's the less educated counties like in rural northern Michigan, rural Wisconsin, et cetera. This time it's very different. There's like basically every county shifts red, every demographic group, which again to me suggests that it's really like on the most macro level, it's the anti-incumbent mood, and whoever the Republicans put up on the top of the ticket was going to do well. Now, I do think that Trump has some particular strengths to go along with his weaknesses. He seemed this time, which we can get into, to be particularly strong with Hispanics, especially in Florida and along the Texas border, but also like everywhere, basically, and among younger men, like men between the ages of 18 and 29. Right. So basically, yes, it's a red wave. People are dissatisfied with the Biden administration, with inflation, immigration, the general kind of cultural, maybe priggishness, the wagging the finger, supercilious elites. And that gives Trump the big advantage. And then, he has like this particular, because of his kind of entertainment background, this image of him being like an alpha, politically incorrect, almost like authoritarian, boorish type figure, that's probably uniquely appealing to younger men. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would totally agree there. We'll get into some of the population groups here, but CNN actually had this really interesting kind of graph. It was nice, is showing how so Trump won all 7 swing states, right? This
Yep.
is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina was in the mix, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. And here's the fascinating thing here. I'll just kind of run through these a little bit really quick. In Pennsylvania, which was tight throughout, and again, to be fair, it wasn't a blowout win in any of these states per se, but it was a solid win. Even, and this is important, taking out the third party, Jill Stein Green Party, Libertarian, Trump solidly would have won anyway. So, you can't really say there. But in 2016, Pennsylvania was essentially a tie. It was just over in the red category, 0.7. But then it recedes back to the Democrats by 1.2% in 2020 with Biden, and now the shift here in 2024, 2.1 point margin. So it even gained, right? Okay, we go to Georgia, 5.1 points. In Georgia in 16 goes 0.3 for Democrats for Biden in 2020. Now this election, 2.2 points. And then North Carolina has continuously stayed red. Sort of was there in 2020, a little bit closer to the mean, but not. Michigan, the same thing, gained points, 1.4 points this election. Arizona had a massive gain. And again, it's a border state. Obviously, immigration's the border, all that stuff's going to be there. But it was 0.4 in 2020 with Biden, 6.4 points gained this time around. Wisconsin's meandered by the mean, but it's just over on the red. And sadly, Nevada was solidly, 08, 12, 2016, 2020, solidly blue. That's for presidential election cycles, 3.3 points so far in 2024. So when you're looking at these big counties and big swing states, you're seeing these big red shifts here. And then there's other places as well. So I guess the question I'm curious about what you think about here is, many people will say, well, white America or rural Americans or whatever, they're going to vote for Trump, but not in cities and not in urban places, not in suburbs, not in blue states, not in, whatever. But how do you account for the fact that Long Island now is red in New York City, and that 1/3 of New York City voters voted for Trump? House seats flipped in upstate New York, I think 2 or 3 of them, in Pennsylvania as well. So on and so forth. What do you make about, in all the big areas, urban, suburban, rural, there's a shift? This wasn't just middle America shift, even far right. It was even in kind of these liberal hotbeds. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so it does seem, this is an interesting point, is that if you look at Trump's margin, it's actually outside of the swing states, he gained 6.7% from 2020. In the swing states, he only gains 3.1%. And also outside of the swing states, the Democratic voters turnout collapses. So just as an example from provisional data here, but if we look at blue states, from 2020 to 2024, moving from Biden to Harris, we get a turnout that's 14.6% down in the bluest states. In red states, the Democrat turnout is down 9.6%. In the battlegrounds, it's only down 4.3%. So it seems like what happened was there was just a general lack of enthusiasm for the Democratic Party and for the Harris campaign across the board. And we don't know exactly what's happening in the battleground states, but perhaps you have a lot of people who feel this existential concern about a Trump administration, and they know they have to get out and vote. So they're not voting because they're really fired up about Harris or the Democrats. They're voting because they're petrified of Trump 2.0. But in these bluer states like Illinois, New Jersey, New York, there's no need to do that because they know like Trump has no chance of winning here. I'm not going to get out and vote for this person. I'm not really thrilled about this. Like they haven't governed very well in the cities. There's just like kind of a sense that the day-to-day quality of life has declined under the Democratic Party in these large urban environments, especially since COVID, I think. So that's one. I mean, again, this is all very provisional, but it does suggest that you just lacked enthusiasm with your coalition and they just didn't turn out.
Well, yes, I totally agree with you on that, but let me push a little on that.
Yeah.
So for example, Clark County, Nevada, Las Vegas is here. We're talking almost 7 points more Republican than in 2020. But
yes.
I mean, the real story here for me, and I think there's a lot of things that could be said here. Queens County in New York City, 21 points Republican more than in 2020. You see this also in the Bronx, 22 points more than in 2020. That's not just low enthusiasm. People are going out and they're voting not only against, the Democrats. And again, this is New York City. I'm not talking about some random county in Missouri or Arkansas. They are going out and voting for Trump in this regards. Even someplace, and now this is a little bit kind of more tricky here, but in Wayne County, Michigan, right, which is big urban area, and almost 10 points, more Republican.
Yes. Yeah,
so
that's right.
You're seeing this in a lot of places. There's a couple of border states as well, or border counties in Texas, 17, 15, 18 points, 20 points more. That's a huge swing.
Yes, I think I agree with that. I think the border counties in Texas are somewhat sui generis. No, though I agree. The collapse in Wayne County and in these large urban areas is quite impressive, and I'm not exactly sure why that happened. So Josh Barrow, writing in The Atlantic, takes the perspective of, basically like a good governance centrist in New York. And he's just like, look, the Democrats have failed. There's a quality of life is lower. Public services are not operating as they should be. Taxes are high. There's just this perception of disorder. Yes, homicide rates have gone down, but there's still, a lot of homeless people out in the streets, people, just making you feel like, not very great about your day-to-day life. I guess my problem with that view, because I think that could apply for New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, but Detroit is having a renaissance right now. It's had the best governance that it's had in decades under Mike Duggan. You're getting billions of dollars of investment downtown. Crime is much lower. Property values are going up. I mean, I drove through there not too long ago, and I was very impressed with it. Okay. What's the story? Chicago? Yeah. Okay. Maybe disorder, low level crime is increasing. That causes people to have kind of just be irritated with democratic governance. Detroit, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, as somebody who is moving more toward this kind of pro-growth, abundance, just build, get shit done, prosecute crime agenda, I want to believe that, but it does make me wonder when I think, okay, why are you getting punished in Detroit? Shouldn't they be pretty happy with what's happening?
Absolutely. There's some interesting things there, so we can talk a little bit more when we get to kind of populations. But let me just give like another kind of example here. So I mean, obviously you're originally from Michigan. I'm from
Yes.
the great state of Maryland, and in so I've lived in and around Baltimore and DC. Most people think of DC as, very liberal and all these things, and that's certainly true. But in the areas, so part of the reason why Virginia goes blue and has gone blue, every election, I think since '08, is because of Northern Virginia. It's right outside DC. It's basically, an arm of DC, right? In the counties there. But just as an example here, Loudoun County, 8.8 points more Republican than 2022. Fairfax
Mhm.
County, 7.5 points. Prince William County, 9 points. So even though Kamala won these counties, this is the critical part. Kamala won these counties, right? And even up in where I live in Western Maryland, she won these counties. But the wins there was no growth. In fact, they still shifted at both levels to more Republican. Now, maybe turnout was better, but there was still a shift, which is, I think, important to note here across the board. Yes, did she win certain counties? Did certain people in their districts win? That's fine. But Democrats can't take that and say, oh, that's a win. Because if you're looking at a shift from 2020, you're still seeing, yeah, even in counties we won, which are liberal hotbeds, there's a almost, double digit shift right. That's definitely something to keep in mind, right? You're seeing this outside of Detroit, you're seeing this outside DC, we're seeing this in New York. Obviously, you're seeing this in counties at the border in Texas. What do you I don't know. What do we what, what's the game plan
Yeah.
here for Democrats?
Well, yeah, that's right. So even I mean, looking at like the WOW counties in Wisconsin and Oakland County in Michigan, like these, really hyper educated, suburban, affluent counties. Yes, Harris just did not grow her vote share, and she
Mhm.
needed to offset losses in rural counties and in the urban areas. And yes, that does not bode well for the Democratic Party. There's also in Wayne County, there's the unique effect of the war in Gaza that
Yeah.
we noted. Like, so you have Dearborn in Michigan that has the
Mhm.
largest Arab population in the United States, and she took like third place, I
Yeah.
believe,
Yeah. Jill Stein was
behind.
second.
Yes. So that's just a big fuck you protest vote,
Oh,
right? That's a
absolutely.
it's genocide, Joe. We're not voting
Yes.
for this ticket. But
Mhm.
that of again, like you're right. This is the important point. Yes, we can look at specific demographics and say, oh well, this like Hispanics on the border in Texas or, like Arabs in Michigan. But no, it's like, no, you lost across the board. The only demographic that I think she will do better than Biden did with is college educated white women. And maybe we don't know for sure, but it seems like that was pretty good for Harris.
Yeah.
Other than
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's not a good story for Democrats. You just clearly people were not buying what you were selling. Now, interestingly, let's see what you think about this. They did relatively well in the Senate races.
You're reading my mind here. I was
Yeah,
just pivoting to the Senate.
right. Like, I mean, we did better than I expected given the national environment and how well Trump did, or again, like how poorly Harris did. And I think the same is true, although I have been paying less attention to the House races.
Mhm.
But Slotkin wins narrowly in Michigan. Tammy Baldwin wins narrowly in Wisconsin. It looks like Gallego will win.
Mhm.
Jackie Rosen wins in Nevada. And I
Barely.
mean, to me, it's like, of course, West Virginia's gone.
That's gone. That's gone.
But also, even same with Sherrod Brown in Ohio and John Tester in Montana. It's just the gravitational pull toward the Republican Party is just too strong in Montana and in Ohio now.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I think if you're a Democrat, you're like, okay, this is pretty bad, but it could have been much worse. And it doesn't seem like the national brand was completely repudiated. It seems as though voters were uniquely displeased with the Biden administration itself.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so let's talk about the Senate for a bit here. So, yes, Baldwin, as it stands at the moment, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, incumbent, 49.4%. Eric Hove, 48.5%. But the amount of votes between them is 27,000, right?
Yeah.
And she obviously wins in the cities.
Yes.
But Eau Claire, Madison, Milwaukee. But it's outside of that. I mean, she doesn't win in Green Bay. She doesn't win outside of Milwaukee, like Kenosha. She's not Waukesha. She's not winning out there. So it's
Yes.
it is tight. I mean, she was behind really until I think a day or two ago. So that was an extremely tight race. But okay, she gets across the finish line. Slotkin, kind of the same story. Now she wasn't an incumbent, but she was a representative in I'm forgetting which district it was in, kind of right outside of what is it, Lansing? Was that the district? I can't remember.
Yes.
But she wins 48.6 to Mike Rogers 48.3, and that's 21,000 votes. So again, not a slam dunk, but it's a win. And the same story up in Marquette in the UP. All the college kids up there, and then it's Detroit, Lansing, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids.
Right. And I think that is, just to interject, I think that's an important point so Alyssa Slotkin's very moderate. She was actually running ads where she was, I guess, like pointing out that her and Trump were similar on certain issues. Basically like, hey, like I can work with this guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like a national security Democrat, I believe. Was she in the CIA? I
think that's
believe.
right. I think that sounds very familiar. Something within.
Yeah, she was like with that group with like Abigail Spanberger and Mickey Sherrill, these kind of moderate female national security types. But what's interesting about it is it's not as if this brought her benefits in rural Michigan. The only areas she's winning are college towns and urban areas, right? She's not playing well in like rural northern Michigan. I think what that suggests is there is we've known this, I guess, for more than a decade, but it's getting worse that the Democratic brand is toxic anywhere outside of metro areas and college towns. Even with moderate Democrats, it's just you have this brand and people in rural Michigan are not voting for you, or rural Wisconsin.
Yeah, maybe you might know. So I want to bring this up here because then you can we can talk about it. I think big picture here. Baldwin was running against this guy. It was Eric Hove. I don't know a lot about him on the Republican side, and Mike Rogers on the Republican side. These aren't like crazy MAGA people, or are they? I can't recall.
No, Rogers wasn't. He was, I'd say, kind of in the hybrid. 1 foot in the Reagan GOP, 1 foot in MAGA type mold.
Yeah.
But he's not like an impressive political figure. He doesn't have that much charisma, and he also was quite bad on reproductive rights. Now, I don't know how much that hurt him, but interestingly, what really seems to have happened there, if you look at the Michigan Senate, I think this holds for the other races, Slotkin got almost the same number of votes in Michigan that Harris did. But Rogers did significantly worse than Trump.
Yeah.
So it suggests that what may have happened is, yes, Trump is able to turn out these disaffected, low propensity voters, but they're going to the ballot specifically to vote for Trump. They
Yes,
don't
this
care
is my
about
point.
they don't care about the Republican Party. GOP is completely meaninless to them. I like Trump.
Yep.
They go in, they check off Trump, and then they leave.
Now let me say this also in the other way. Even so, we can kind of turn, I guess, to Arizona here. Even when you're getting now, she still has an outside chance of winning. I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult. But even someone like Carrie Lake, who's absolutely fucking batshit crazy, like she makes Trump look kind of reasonable, right? I mean, she just takes that model and goes all the way to the right with it, right? I mean, she's pretty nuts, right? And look, Gallego's fine. He's not he's not he's not the bright star of the Democratic Party, let's just be honest, but he's fine. But Harry, I mean, it's tight. Like they still haven't officially called it, but a lot of the times you saw this in 2020, you know, Herschel Walker, Dr. Oz, Mastriano. Jesus. But these people aren't voting for, they don't want Trump-lite. They don't want diet Trump. They want Trump and that's it. Right? So even on the Republican side, it's not, oh, I'm voting for the party, or, oh, this person's kind of like Trump or does the same kind of thing. I mean, this is essentially why I think DeSantis just flamed out so fast, is people like Trump. Like this, and it's still to be known, right? 8-9 years later, what happens post-Trump, whenever that is, I don't think anybody knows, because as far as I can tell, on the House, on the Senate, in the presidential races, people go and vote for Trump. They're not voting for necessarily MAGA or the GOP or anything like that, because you can see this on different types of candidates that they put up. They're not really buying it. They don't want diet Trump. They want Trump. Is that kind of your takeaway too?
Yeah, that's I think it's complicated, right? Because in the 2022 midterms, the normie Republicans, who were just these kind of like competent, you know, basically good managers, good executives who just got shit done without a lot of drama, did incredibly well. I mean, Chris Sununu, especially DeWine, bitch smacked his opponent by 26. DeSantis won by 19. So what it suggests, it's like, okay, so Trump is uniquely good at turning out, again, like these kind of marginal, disaffected rural voters. And, you know, there is a maybe 5-10% base that just loves the MAGA antics. But I don't know. I don't know if you would, like, my sense is that if you had run a normie Republican such as Nikki Haley or even Marco Rubio or Clint Youngkin, the national election, it would be Republicans plus 4 or 5 in the popular, and you would have done much better. So it's like Trump simultaneously does appeal to certain demographics in a unique way, but he's also repellent to other demographics, right? And so what is the exact balance on that? I don't know. What I do agree with you 100%, though, that when you try to do the diet Trump with Carrie Lake, it really doesn't work, because it seems like you don't even appeal to the people who the people who Trump uniquely appeals to. They don't care about you, and you lose all of the people who would be like normie Republicans, like, you know, moderates in the suburbs, etc. So I don't know. On balance, I think my view, probably a controversial take, somewhat, given the fact that there was a red wave, is that Trump is still just a bad candidate. He underperformed what you would expect a normal Republican to do in this environment. And my argument would be this is the third straight election that Trump has underperformed a normal Republican.
Mm. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the irony of all this, right? I mean, that's it is complicated. It is hard to say. Just to loop around on the Senate here. So, Gallego will get it, but barely.
Yes.
Jackie Rosen in Nevada, I think yesterday or earlier today was confirmed that she has Nevada. She's won, but again, she won Nevada, though, very analogous to her counterpart, Cortez Mastro in 22, the other Democratic senator from Nevada. I mean, she's won by 20,000 votes. You know what I mean? Like it's Vegas and Reno, and then everywhere else is red. And she's winning barely. I mean, Cortez Mastro, I think, was going to have a runoff or was so close to it. Like it's so close in Nevada on the Senate side. And then in PA, in Pennsylvania is, essentially, a red state in a lot of ways. If you go outside Philly, Pittsburgh, you're basically all red. And so, McCormick's going to win barely, but he's going to win. But this is the thing that is so interesting. So, and then as you mentioned, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, he loses by it looks like about to be 5 percentage points. Obviously, we knew West Virginia is never going to be blue again. So Jim Justice, former governor, wins in West Virginia by 30 points or whatever it is. And then Tester in Montana, who's been there for 12 years, was going for a third term, I think. He loses 8 points essentially. So, and then when you look at places that were in the discussion, Ted Cruz beats Allred by almost 10 percentage points. He beats him by almost 1 million votes in Texas, right? Florida is full red. That went from red to crimson this year. Rick Scott crushes Marcelo Powell, by 12, 15, by almost by 1.5 million votes. So when when the Senate into these kind of areas where people talk about it, or maybe it's close, they just end up crushing, right? But I'm curious here, what's that? So we can talk about this just generally. Yes, the Democrats win, but they're not winning. We're talking 20,000 votes in each of these states or whatever, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona's tight.
Yes.
But how does that? I want to know this. It's so interesting. Like someone goes in and they're doing split ticket voting, or they're voting Trump and not voting for anything else down ticket. How does that work? Like, how does Trump win Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, but in each of those 4 states, the Democratic senator wins, and then even some House seats are flipped in some of these places. What do you make of that in the mind of the voter there?
Well, so I do know Nevada is similar in that Rosen, I think, is only running like 10,000 under Harris, whereas Sam Brown's running like 50, 60K under Trump. So I really I think this is what happens when your unique superpower as a candidate is to gin up disaffected, low propensity voters, right? They don't care about having the Senate. They don't even know what the Senate does. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, they don't care about, they're not thinking, in order to get this, high tariff mass deportation agenda that I really want, it requires that we have the Senate. They're just like Trump. Trump's awesome. Dude was at McDonald's serving fries, man.
Driving the garbage truck,
Right. So I think that this, and it's something of a flip from the traditional pattern where it was usually, right, like in the 80s, 90s, the Democrats were good at getting the lower propensity voters, working class, and so on. But then when you got to the midterms or special elections, they performed poorly because their voters just wouldn't turn out for those elections. And I think this is something that's happening now with the Republican Party, that if you have Trump on the top, you can get these voters. But if he's not there, as we saw in 2022, you're in real trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the curious thing. None of it kind of fits neatly like it used to. And I think this is part and parcel of why polling was just, to be fair to polling, I know it gets a lot of shit over the past 10 years, but they weren't that off. I think most people I think they were off by 2-3 points in some places in the swing states. But, it wasn't anything, wild, like 2016. It wasn't anything like that.
I listened to Michael Brendan Doherty on the National Review do this like withering Jeremiad against polling, and it's just, it's miserable. It's basically like astrology. No, the polling was reasonably accurate. It gave you pretty good information. For example, like it had Harris doing, of the battleground states, she was doing worse in Arizona. Right. And that, I think that'll end up being the case.
I think it was 3 points before, at least 3 points. I think that's
and it had, like, if you looked at it, it was like the last polling had her maybe even slightly behind in Pennsylvania and even in Michigan and Wisconsin. So, and two down in Georgia, maybe, and a little bit closer in North Carolina. But yeah, the polling, I just like it. Now it is interesting and worthy of reflection to think, okay, why is it the case that for the third straight election with Trump on the ticket, polling underestimated him? Right. That's interesting.
It is.
It just suggests that there is something very unique about Trump that just, it's hard to measure the support that he has. Is that like non-response bias, people who are, you're not capturing like a small number of these people who are completely disaffected from politics. They don't trust institutions and they won't respond to pollsters. I find that plausible.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, I definitely think it is a sort of, reckoning of sorts of like, okay, like, we do need to not underestimate what the power that Trump has in terms of getting people out, and it really is him. I guess just we can just take a sort of a detour here before we go into the population stuff. Could Trump be the most influential president or politician, I guess you could call him, of sorts, since FDR? I'm gonna prime you for this hot take.
Yes, he could. Yes.
Tell me your reasoning here.
Well, yes. Well, first of all, he's just clearly the most important political figure in the United States over the last 8 years, and now it's going to be 12 years, right? Yep. He was the most salient political force during his presidency, clearly, but also during the last 4 years when he wasn't even president. And now he's going to be again. So you'd say, okay, well, you've had 12 years now. And in fact, interestingly, he kind of gets lucky in a way from not winning in 2020, and that it gives him 4 more years of influence over political life and the Republican Party. So it's going to be 12 years where he's going to be the single most important political figure, most influential on overall culture, et cetera. And he's completely bent the Republican Party to his will. You think about what the Senate looked like in Senate and House in 2016 when he won the first election. It was not very Trumpy. In fact, it was like obviously a barely concealed secret that most of the people in the Senate despised him. And they, to the extent that they were happy, it was, well, now we've got this, worthless, empty vessel who can pass these policies that we want, like tax cuts and repealing the Affordable Care Act. Well, now in 2024, you have a very Trumpy Senate and a Trumpy House. and the Republican Party has eschewed the Reagan orthodoxy. No longer is fusionism. It's not foreign policy hawkishness, social conservatism, and free markets. It's national conservatism.
But don't you think that the Republicans are doing that because he wins? Because there's such a pull. Like if folks know a little bit of history here of, Republicans just always losing to Democrats, Southern Democrats, all this, and that counter revolution, if you will, with Reagan really doing the culture wars things, taxes, and then it went away again with Clinton, and then sort of there with Bush, but kind of neocon, and then Obama. Like Republicans want to fucking win. Like they want to win and they want to dominate. And like the reason he's bent them to his will is because they finally figured out, look, no matter what, this guy wins. And he doesn't just win a little bit. He wins big and he figures it out and he allows us to be tough and all, this kind of stuff. Like, you think why that's a big part of it politically? He politically wins.
Wow. Does he though?
I mean, he did in 2016. He did this year.
Okay. Right. So let's say this, like, it's hard again, like, so I think there was something of a corrective with Trump, like bucking the orthodoxy on free trade and on immigration, and making the Republican Party much more moderate on economic issues, not going after Social Security or entitlements and Medicare. I think when you have an increasingly like an older white voting base and a working class base, that makes a lot of sense. So I think his superpower is he has an incredible connection with primary voters in the Republican Party. I don't actually think that he's like the best national candidate. I don't think the Republican Party is particularly healthy right now. No, the Democratic Party is worse. So
yeah, we'll come to the Democrats in a bit.
You could. I mean, I don't. Again, I'm not dogmatic about this. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I think somebody could make a case that if you had a more normie Republican Party, the Democrats would be in much worse shape. We would have lost worse in 2022, and we would lose more in 2024. Maybe if you had Haley Youngkin, that was your ticket, or whatever. Take whatever kind of ticket you want that's not 100% MAGA.
I don't know. I'm like of two minds of this. In one sense, I'm agreeing with that. But on the other hand, I think just what we've seen over the past 8-9 years is that isn't the case. Like there's so many people that, maybe there's some, left of center Democrats that would pull the lever on Haley or whatever because, somebody, but is like hardcore MAGA going Nikki Haley? No way.
Yes. So I do agree with that. As I've said, I think this is true that you would lose some of these lower propensity voters who are just, for whatever reason, they find Trump uniquely appealing. They love the MAGA, the culture war, the boorishness, the middle
taking
finger
it to the man. Let's kick shit open. Let's just fucking, to take some of this apart. We don't need this anymore. The kind of, yes. This is why libertarians like him too. I mean, people, there's a good branch of libertarians that like his protect our freedoms, get rid of the fucking EPA, Department of Ed, like they like that part of it too.
Yeah. I think that is true. So that's the case. But I don't know if that offsets your losses. I can just speak for myself. If you had Haley on the ticket at the head, I'd vote for her.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be fine with that. And I don't think that I'm alone. I think that there are a lot of people who are centrist or center right who just cannot vote for Trump. They just find him despicable.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess, the question is, if you lose some of the most fervid, low propensity MAGA people, and you replace that with more of a normal Republican, electorate or coalition, is that better or worse for you? And I will say, I guess one thing that I would say is, well, if we look at the most magnified candidates who are not Trump, they don't seem to do very well. They underperform. So that suggests to me that the MAGA movement and MAGAification of the Republican Party has actually been not to their benefit. I know that's hard to say considering what has happened, but I
Right.
I just think if you had, again, a more normal, maybe a hybrid, with some of the culture war, some of the bucking of neoliberalism. But I think that
I don't know. I mean, look, I'm gonna be honest. I mean, a lot of people, I know a handful of people that liked Trump, but they thought he was a little bit kind of getting older, just playing the greatest hits. Okay. And they were fully in the RFK Jr. camp. And then as soon as RFK Jr. joined ranks with Trump, boom, okay, fine. There it is. Some people felt this when Tulsi Gabbard went from, Dem to Republican in 4 years, and everyone was just like, yes, because she had that, again, quasi, anti-establishment. We're gonna, get some shit, done, and we're gonna protect our freedoms, a kind of quasi-libertarian, if you will. And then she supports him and all that. I mean, they all bend the knee at a certain point, but it's one of those things where it's like people like that. I mean, there was a substantial movement for RFK Jr. There's people I knew that did vote for Trump twice, and then people that were Democrats or people that weren't as interested are like, I don't like Trump. I definitely don't like the Democrats. And, this guy's a little different. And why not? I know a handful of people that were like that. And then they just voted for Trump because RFK Jr. aligned with him. I don't know if the regression to the normie, Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney necessarily, I don't know. I literally don't know. It's an interesting one.
I agree. And certainly it's the case that the institutional arsonists and cranks who, just want to burn everything down and hate the establishment and that yes, they find Trump definitely appealing. I agree with that. But my thought is that that's a relatively small number of voters overall. They're vocal. They have a large, probably outsized presence and influence on, let's say, X. But I think most voters basically, and I think we saw this with the data, some of the data on what voters cared about in this election. They just want to be left alone and they want prices to be low. I don't think they actively like all of the chaos that surrounds Trump, but they're just like, fuck it. The last 4 years have been really bad. There's chaos at the border. Prices have gone up dramatically. They're not getting better. Gas is more expensive. My pocketbook is worse off than it was in 2019. I'm going to give this guy a chance. They think of him as he's a good businessman. He knows how to get shit done.
Yep.
2019, things were going pretty well. He says a lot of stuff that's irresponsible and actually kind of grotesque, but look, my pocketbook matters more than mean tweets and stupid comments. No, I think that I'll caveat that by saying I believe that's an incorrect view, but I understand it. It's understandable that someone would think that who's a relatively low information voter.
Yeah. No,
But
I agree.
yeah, I think that person, you throw out like maybe not Haley, but you throw out somebody who seems like a pro-growth, pro-business, like common sense conservative.
Mm-hmm.
I think that those people vote for that individual. I think they're like, yeah, great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mostly agree with that. I think at the end of the day, that's usually what people want. But we're going back to the FDR kind of hot take here. I mean, there is something about Trump that is, I don't want to say charismatic, but he's entertaining. He's funny. He tells it like it is. He's going to say what he thinks, which is what a lot of people think. And so it's that plus all the things you just said about, the economy, that he knows how to get things done. I want my pocketbook to be better, stuff to come down. I do think it's that marriage of it. If you get like a boring, I mean, I like Ben Sass when he was in the Senate, but like if you, a moderate Republican that's going to do these things, but he doesn't have that kind of thing, that it factor, that entertainment charisma. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
And well, another thing I do think is that let's say, Romney-Ryan incarnation of the Republican Party, it was, I believe, too cosmopolitan for Republic, right? So that is something about Trump, is that he's definitely not like he doesn't code as a cosmopolitan, out of touch elite. Mm-mm. So I do think, yes, you need kind of a synthetic character who has I'm one of you, a little bit of the culture war instinct, but is also, I think, mostly like a normie Republican. I think that'd be optimally effective. So, yeah, I mean, now, to be clear, Trump could absolutely flame out and have one of the worst 4-year presidencies since George W. Bush, and he could completely destroy the modern Trumpy MAGA incarnation of the Republican Party. It's hard to prognosticate. I just say, clearly, what he has done with the Republican Party over the last 8 years is unparalleled.
Oh, yeah. This is to your comparison. It's absolutely right. I mean, he has transformed that party a full 180. I mean, a full 180.
It's unrecognizable, right?
Yes.
There are still old school Reagan normie Republicans, but it's just, the overall party, it's just much more aggrieved. It's very much a victimhood, like these cosmopolitan elites, multinational corporations, immigrants are stealing my. This is, I saw this take by Claire Lemon and Quillette, that this was a victory of against victimhood politics. And I thought, really? I don't know a figure who leans more into victimhood and grievance than Donald Trump.
Oh, it's the courts, it's the Justice Department,
everything.
It's the media, it's Democrats, it's a foreign entity. Everybody is so hard on him. They're so hard on him.
Right. And all of the most boisterous of the MAGA influencers, everything is grievance. It's outrage. It's liberal elites. It's like the woke, trans, I'm a victim. Oh my God, they're trying to steal our country. There are, it's immigrants stealing our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, to be clear, that's effective politics often, like playing on grievance and victimhood.
Yeah.
But maybe you argue that it's morally fine, like that FDR would attack the money lenders and corporations. Bernie Sanders does that. Reagan would use grievance against bureaucrats in the federal government. But just to say that this is like a victory against victimhood politics, no, this is victimhood politics. And in fact, Harris herself tried to run a pretty centrist campaign, not emphasizing identity and grievance and victimhood. It was more of an optimistic, or at least an attempt to be optimistic. We're not going back, playing the Beyonce freedom song, etc.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's clearly the Democratic Party still has issues with the woke stuff and being perceived as extreme on trans issues and on gender ideology and race. But to the extent that you just focused on Harris's message and read through her speeches, there wasn't a whole lot of grievance or victimhood there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, it wasn't. I mean, I think that, people have been kind of giving her a lot of shit. And I think, maybe there's some things there, but I think this is really Democrats as a whole and the Democratic Party and maybe a little bit of how Biden, kind of handled things and stuff. I think more so there than it is for her directly. I think she did the best she could in 110 days or whatever it was. I mean, that, she had some little flubs here and there, but I mean, considering the landscape, I think it's, she did the best she could.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think everyone kind of knew that she was a mediocre candidate. She was saddled with incredibly unpopular positions that she took in 2019 and 2020. She was the vice president of an incredibly unpopular administration. She is not the quickest thinker. She doesn't have like a depth of policy knowledge in the way that Pete Buttigieg or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton do. Yep. She's not particularly good in interviews. Given all of that, I think she ran a pretty damned good campaign. It certainly exceeded my expectations.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I wish they had a mini primary, but they didn't do that. And Biden stayed in too long. And when he got out for some inexplicable reason, which clearly he hadn't run through like Obama or Pelosi, because Pelosi was expecting a mini primary as well, he just came out with a statement supporting Harris as the nominee and or endorsing her. And that means it's fait accompli at that point.
Of course. Yeah. And I mean, I think, again, it just talks about the dysfunction of the party. So before we get there, I guess let's talk about the population kind of demographic stuff, which is interesting. We can start wherever you want to start, but I guess, everyone's blaming Latin people at the moment, right? So maybe we start with Hispanics. So what are your, I'll say, my thoughts, but I want to hear what your thoughts are first about what are the kind of big things or big takeaways that you're getting or any particular details that you think are interesting about what is going on? Why everyone's shocked? I'm not, but why everyone's shocked that Latinos are voting this way?
First, we can just note that this Trump in 2024 may have, depending on exactly how the numbers work out, he may have got the largest share of Hispanics of any Republican running for president.
Yes, I think beating 04 Bush, I think.
Which I think George W. Bush got 44% in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could make an argument that, I mean, it's hazardous to speak of Hispanics as though it's a homogenous block of voters, but just to be simple about it, that Hispanics tend to be culturally conservative, and there are a lot of Catholic Hispanic voters, a lot who are pretty conservative on criminal justice, on immigration, etc. And that naturally, like if they were voting, if their partisanship matched their ideology, it might be 60% of Hispanics who would be voting Republican. So this may be a reversion back to the ideology of these voters, and that actually Barack Obama defied gravity somewhat there because he was this very cool, charismatic, inspirational figure, and was the identity that was activated by Obama with Hispanics was the Democrats are the multiracial party that welcomes you and is inclusive. And that was cutting against the more cultural conservatism there. And now that cultural conservatism is kind of manifesting again. And then furthermore, I think Hispanics, like in general, are attuned to their pocketbooks. A lot of working class people. They left the Republican Party after 2008 because the George W. Bush presidency was a complete disaster. You ended with a global financial crisis. So then they're like, okay, well, things will get better under the Democrats. And they did. Under Obama, the economy began to improve, etc. And now when you have the Democrats fucking the economy up, again, how much of the blame goes to Biden? We can set that to the side, but at least the perception is that they did. Then you get the swing back to the Republican Party. Interesting question will be, is this durable? Right? Is it? No, this is you've sorted whites ideologically over the last 60 years so that basically any white who says I'm liberal is voting Democrat and any white who says I'm conservative is voting Republican. Is it possible that this is what happens to Hispanic voters? That ideology is the determinative factor? That is kind of the David Shore hypothesis, is that eventually every ethnic group will sort on ideology. It started with whites, now it's moving into Hispanics and Asians, and then it's going to move into blacks. I don't know. That's it. It's an open question. I don't want to pretend that I know the answer, but certainly Trump made huge gains there. Just as one data point, there are 4 counties in southern Texas on the border, Starr, Maverick, Zapata, and Webb, that from 2016 to 2024 have shifted in the Republican direction by more than 50%.
Yep.
Okay. Of the 18 counties on the border in Texas, Trump won 14 of them and Harris won 4. Okay. To put that into context, in 2008, Barack Obama had 14 and McCain had 4. Right. So there are clearly shifts, and we see this in Florida as well. There are huge shifts by mostly Cubans, Venezuelans, Hondurans toward the Republican Party.
Yep.
So that would be like my kind of broadest take. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say on this. So I've talked about this on the podcast. I've written about this publicly. Obviously, I have private conversations about this. So you're absolutely right. How do I explain this? So typically, it is absolutely true that Latinos or Hispanics around, not Latinx, I'll come to that in a minute, my pet peeve there, but I'll come to that in a minute. But Hispanics, typically, when you look at Latin America, there's 22, 23 countries, very diverse group of folks, right? You have in each country, you have Afro-Latinos, you have indigenous folks, you have mestizos, which is a combination of indigenous and Latin or European descent. That's the majority of many countries, etc. So it's an ethnicity, right? It's a big ethnicity, but generally, these are big. So someone from Cuba is going to be different from someone from Costa Rica or Guatemala, which is going to be different from someone from Chile or Colombia, right? So there are differences all up and down the Western Hemisphere, but generally, you're right. When you think about kind of cultural kinds of groupings, most Latinos have some form of cultural and or religiosity, trends, Roman Catholic, but there is a sizable percentage of evangelical Christians as well, Pentecostals, and then you get some other folks as well in there, Jehovah's Witness, things like that. But let's say, Christian and mostly Catholic. Typically, There is so they have some sense of traditional roles. Men go out and work, women stay home, they take care of the family. Again, that's not everywhere. That does change as we evolve, but that is still pretty common in a lot of places. Typically, many of these countries are what we used to say is, third world poor. Now some are developing economies, but, in the quote unquote global South, there's a lot of progress, but there is still lots of poverty that is in a lot of these places. So they care about economics. That's a major reason why they come to the United States. And a lot of it emphasizes, family. Again, there's traditional roles. Some of that changes, but then there's also importance of, parents with children. There's obviously this importance of very hard work ethic, kind of this rugged individualism. You don't take a handout. You work 4 jobs, 20 hours if you need to, but you make sure you earn it. That kind of thing. So when Hispanics come to the United States, and again, this is pretty true, I think, of the demographic generally. Again, there's differences, but when they come to the United States and they look out into the landscape politically in the U.S. with all of those things I just said, hard work, individualism, traditional roles, religiosity, etc., which party is going to be appealing just on baseline?
Yeah, if you just what you're describing
is a Republican.
It's like it's a stereotype of a Republican voter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Republicans typically are individualism, pull yourself by your bootstraps, hard work ethic, your
traditional gender roles, male breadwinner,
religiosity.
Yep.
So what I have told people is when I meet fellow Latinos, right, I just assume they're Republican. I never assume they're Democrat. That's a strange thing to assume, right? Now, you do get some changes with this, but so here's some other things here, right? When you think about integration and or assimilation of different waves of migration or immigration, some people are coming from violent crime. Some people are coming from, historically certain wars or conflicts. Sometimes it's just very extreme poverty, etc. And when they do come to the United States, they're usually trying to, like a lot of people, have a better life, make more money, whatever. But as generations go, you get, immigrants, then you get first generation, second generation, third generation. Now, it does start to kind of, trickle down effect there is interesting. But really what's most important to, I think, understand is that, yes, there is no Latino vote because, and we'll get into some of the numbers here in a minute, Latinos in different parts of the country are going to assimilate or integrate based on their local, regional communities, right? So you cannot compare Latinos in Carson County or whatever it is in Nevada to Miami-Dade in Florida. It's just completely different. Now they still might have some general themes together, but and that's going to be significantly different. And so it's really important, I think, for people to understand Latinos really do care about. I mean, plenty of people in my family, plenty of people I know, friends, things like that. They care about number one all the time, whenever, jobs and the economy. They could not care less about anything else really. If you really press them, they might, certain groups or certain places, they might care about certain issues, of course, but it's usually the economy. And in my sense, I don't see Latinos that different politically and economically from white working class people in the Midwest. It's very analogous in a lot of ways, right? There are obviously differences, but so with the numbers, you're right. In 2004, Bush re-election won 40% of the Latino vote. Currently, as it stands, Trump is at 42%. So Trump has gained the highest of the Latino vote in modern history. Right?
Yes.
And just for a comparison point, for Obama, it was 67%. This is just national numbers. 67%. If for Obama re-election, it was 71%. It went down with Clinton to 65%. kind of parked there, 66% for Biden. There was some downturn in certain areas, but nationally it was there. And now you see a total kind of flip, even more specifically here when you're looking at the numbers. So Latinos, in terms of how they were voting, make up 12% of the voting bloc. At least 46%, 42 to 46% voted. When you split Latino men and Latino women, it's 6 and 6 roughly. And look, Latino men is 55%, right? It is overwhelmingly voting for Trump, overwhelming. But even Latinas, right? So Latino women, 38%. That's up from 32% for Biden in 2020. So this isn't just Latin men, that machismo, blah, 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 whatever that is. I mean, that's certainly a big part of it. I'm not saying that's not a factor, but it's also women. You have almost 40% of Latinas voting for Trump.
Yeah.
And that's important to know. This isn't just Latin men. So either way, it's there. It's high. The amount of bleed that's been there. You're talking from 68% with Clinton, now where it's only 52% for Harris. You're talking about a 15 percentage points in 8 years with the same guy running every time. You've had 3 different Democratic candidates, Clinton, Biden, Harris, and it's just bleed all the way with Latinos.
So the Obama coalition is definitely gone, right?
Yes.
The Obama coalition, which would be basically hold on to enough, working class, non-college whites to do well, and then add women, minorities, and younger voters. Right now, that's gone because younger voters, massive shift to the right as well. And then Hispanics, yes, like this is huge because it's huge just because this is it's an important, political, sociological phenomenon, but it also has tremendous electoral consequences. You cannot win Arizona. You can't win Texas. You can't win Florida. You can't win Nevada if you're doing, only 50% of the Hispanic vote. You're going to lose.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And look, you can break this down any way you want. By age, 18 to 29 of Latinos, 45% to Trump. 30 to 44, 44%. 45 to 64, so that mid-age, kind of the Gen Xers, 48%. 65 plus, 41%. So you can do this by income. Less than 50,000, 54% of Latinos are voting. 50 to 100, 44%. 100 plus, 54% for Trump. I mean, it's just every single breakdown. And now here's one interesting thing. You can tell me what you think. This kind of in the larger conversation we've had, you can kind of see this, right? You can kind of see where this goes. So from 2020 to 24, in the kind of big swing states, border states, there was a 12-point shift in Nevada, 4-point shift in Arizona, 14 in Texas. A lot of those counties shifted on the border. A 12-point shift in Florida, 15 points in Pennsylvania, 10 in Ohio, 2 in Wisconsin, 5 in Georgia, 8 in North Carolina. And so, as you were saying, Miami-Dade County swung 19 points to Trump from 2020 to 24. Now, however, look at this, though. In the Senate, in Nevada, 62% are voting for Jackie Rosen. In Arizona, 68% of Latinos are voting for Gallego. 64% voted for already in Texas. So there is something. The only one that was the winner here was Rick Scott in Florida, 43%. But there is something, again, interesting about Latinos. It's Trump at the top, but they're going to vote for the kind of, normie, moderate, maybe Democrat on the Senate side.
Yeah, it's really, it's obviously absolutely flabbergasting to a lot of the more woke progressives who just, you can't fathom that the Hispanic realignment occurred with Trump. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Republican theory of the case in their autopsy of 2012 was, well, we have to be more inclusive and be better about immigration. Like we need to be, maybe do an amnesty, be a little bit less restrictionist, talk less condescendingly about illegal immigration or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then Trump comes in and says, obviously descends the golden escalator in 2015 and fires off his first shots of their, like sending drug dealers and rapists, etc., and has continued this kind of rhetoric unapologetically, including talking about building the wall. They're eating cats and dogs. They're taking over apartments in Aurora, Colorado. And yet, what has happened? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
it is flummoxing to a lot of, I think, left of center people. It is somewhat, I have to say, flabbergasting to me. Like, I don't quite get it. But at the same time, this is very real. And it does seem like Trump has a unique appeal, especially, I mean, as you said, it's like Hispanic women as well at 38%, but especially with Hispanic men.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it suggests that they have, to some extent, they're not like this like identity group who wants to be treated like some separate, like special victim group. They're identify as, basically white Americans, working class Americans, and want to be treated as such and like the general aesthetic of Trump. And I read in the Wall Street Journal, they interviewed some people from these border counties, and uniformly, it was pocketbook, eggs are insane, and we don't trust. And a lot of these guys were working in the oil fields, and they said we don't trust that Harris is pro fossil fuel, right? Like we're going to lose our jobs. And that was it. Simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is the thing. This is probably a larger conversation, but it doesn't matter. People, I mean, it does matter, but people aren't necessarily voting for democracy. They're not voting for someone's morals. They're not voting for their rhetoric per se, or how they talk or how they are. At the end of the day, when people that week before, the weekend before, they're voting for what's going to make their week to week, month to month pocketbook better. And that's, and people can hate that. They can like it. You can call those people racist or sexist, all these things. But at the end of the day, that's really what it is. It's just economics. I mean, I'll just make a finer point on Latinos, and then we can move to gender a little bit. In Arizona, 41% Latino men for Trump, 44% Latino women for Trump. In Florida, 64% Latino men, 52% Latino women. In Nevada, 59% Latino men for Trump, 37% Latino women for Trump. In Texas, 64% Latino men for Trump, and 43% Latino women. In total, someplace like Michigan, 6% are Latinos there, 58% for Trump. It's all over the map. It's at the border states, but it's even in other places. Ohio was split. Yeah, there was only 3% of Latinos that voted in Ohio, but it's 50-50. And in North Carolina, 7% are Latinos there. There's like actually a healthy Latino population in North Carolina. It was down the middle. It was 50-50. So you're seeing nationally, but when you break it down by not just swing states, but many other critical states, it's over 50% or right at 50% for Trump. So this goes back to my larger point. This is economics. They're not voting for Trump because he said some things about Haitians, or he said he's going to do mass deportations. Latinos care about, for the most part, economics. And so that's all you have to do, is you just beat that over everyone's head on the Democrat side. It's just economics and why it's better. And you can make some gains. But until they do that, they're just going to keep bleeding was 22% of Latinos are part of the U.S. population and growing, that's just going to be an issue. So, okay, gender. What do you want to say about gender? There's some interesting things to say about gender here, both in terms of, as always, it's very interesting about women, particularly white women, but then also for men and even younger men. What do you want to jump in here about gender?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me the only thing interesting in terms of women was that Harris actually did worse with women than Biden did in 2020. So you ran a campaign that was explicitly targeting women, going around with Liz Cheney, Oprah as a surrogate, Beyonce, and doing the like Brene Brown and the Call Me Daddy podcast, and it doesn't seem like it really paid off. So that's the story to me. It's like, yeah, look, like it turns out that women care a lot about inflation and the economy. And somebody made this point, which I didn't think of because I do my my own grocery shopping. But for a lot of households, right, like women are doing the grocery shopping every week. Mm-hmm. They see what's happening and feel it in a very, it's very salient to them. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I don't find the female vote that interesting just because it's basically what you got with Biden, except for a small shift probably to Trump, but nothing outside of the ordinary given the overall environment. With men, especially men between the ages of 18 and 29, there was a huge shift toward Trump and the Republican Party. Mm. And I think if you look at the provisional data, it suggests that if we're looking at men under 30, comparing 2020 to 2024, in 2020, men under 30 voted plus 15 for Biden. Mm-hmm. In 2024, men under 30 voted plus 13 for Trump. That's a 28-point shift in one election. That is a huge shift. And it suggests that this Trump strategy of going on all of these manosphere podcasts, Joe Rogan, hanging out with the Nelk boys, Theo Von, chumming up with Dana White, Hulk Hogan, it paid off. Like
it did.
And all of these, the leisure activities that young men participate in, video games, weightlifting, sports, it's all now Republican coded. Right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
So absolutely. they're getting massively socialized and in kind of this enculturation in this real kind of Republican space that's very anti-woke, anti-PC. Let men be fucking men. Why can't we just like talk about some of this uncouth stuff or make like ethnic jokes or jokes about gender? And then, they feel they don't want to have somebody like a school marm wagging their fingers at them. Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is the aesthetic of the Republican Party, that they seem kind of transgressive, anti-PC, more pro-masculine virtues. And then part of it, you have the unique appeal of Trump and then this deliberate strategy to go on all these podcasts, to send JD Vance out on these podcasts. So it's a combination of all of these factors, I think. And the Harris campaign leaning in the opposite direction, like being explicitly like feminine. And I'm not saying that selecting a more masculine vice president would have helped much because, it would not have. But mm-hmm. Tim Walz does not exactly exude traditional masculinity, right? He just seems...
I mean, a little bit with the I'm under the hood working on the car. I mean, a little bit.
Walls is the guy who's under the hood working on the car, and then he fucks your carburetor up, and he's like, "Guess we're gonna have to take it to the shop because I don't know what I'm doing." But like I mean, nothing. He seems like a perfectly decent human being, but
Yes. Yes.
he's not a traditionally masculine guy in the way that a Josh Shapiro or a Mark Kelly would have a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
more gravitas and alpha like energy.
That's right. Yeah. I certainly agree with that.
So I would just say, just to conclude here, I think
Yeah.
this is a problem that the Democratic Party is going. I mean, I can imagine a world where they win back some of these voters, like to the extent the Hispanic vote is just pocketbook, which
Mhm.
is, we could debate. There's some data that suggests it might be more ideology, but let's say it is pocketbook. Well, then we can. That's fine. Democrats can get that back. I think you're going to really have trouble with younger men because it's the core of the Democratic brand is like now pro institutions, watching the way you use your language, very much like feminine, the care economy, the knowledge economy, not exactly optimally designed to appeal to a 21-year-old dude who just wants to slam a few beers, play video games, and watch a football game.
In some ways, the Democrats have just become Republicans from 20 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, that's the real thing here is, go tell Bob Dole, and R.I.P. Bob Dole, but Bob Dole or John McCain, again, R.I.P. John McCain, or even Mitt Romney, that this is Republicans, and young Republican dudes, and this is what they're into, and they just want to, all these things. It was that very, you got to do the right thing, this isn't right, whatever, very kind of, a little scolding, maybe a little pedantic, very corrective,
right.
All these
in the
things.
90s, importantly, I think, and completely agree, that the brand of the Republican Party in the 80s, 90s, and aughts was they're socially conservative, kind of prudish, right? Like marriage, monogamy, don't do drugs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the Democratic Party had a little bit of a risque streak, like Bill Clinton. Like, I didn't inhale, but at the time, that kind of seemed cool. It's like Slick Willie's going to bust out a saxophone and talk about toking or spliffing a J or something, right? Whereas the Republicans are just like, it's all about moral rectitude. And now, it has. Now you've got this transgressive, JD Vance is like just shooting the shit with Joe Rogan. They're cursing, talking a bit, talking about, he made this comment about, just like casually, some dude with a mini skirt who had his balls out in New York. And this is JD Vance. That's the vice presidential candidate who's saying this with no shame or concern at all because he knows that it plays perfectly fine now.
Right. Yeah. No.
Whereas I can't imagine a Democrat.
And Tim Walz isn't saying that, right? Tim Kaine isn't saying that, right?
Right.
But that's right. Even Obama, I mean, Obama's kind of a political unicorn in every single way. But like, he was hip. He plays basketball, like really likes it. He knows ball really well. He can tell you about stats and numbers. He can talk to Joe the plumber. Which feels like ancient history now. He has this kind of streak in him where he can, like, it's not uber masculine. It's not, but he's not a soy boy, right? Like he's not like Obama is not that, right? He is confident, maybe too much or whatever, but like he can do those things, right? He can talk with folks about where they're at. Again, he's older now. He's out of the public, eye for the most part. But in that moment, Democrats were still, that kind of like, okay, like, you could still do that. But that's a big problem though, because so to your point, right? When people were talking about, so you remember in the week-ish before, a couple weeks, a week-ish before, everyone was talking about, well, women are going out. We're seeing early voting with women, and we're seeing early voting with Gen Z, and like, oh my God, and everyone just assumed W for Democrats. And I was sitting over there like, I don't think that necessarily means Democratic votes. Now, people didn't explicitly say that, but people were feeling pretty buoyant because they were like, oh, we got the abortion thing, or women's rights. They're going out there. They're going to go and vote. They're, all these things. And so the women thing is really interesting to me, right? Because Trump has said some horrific things about women. J.D. Vance has said some horrible things about women, right?
Yes.
But when you look at this, 45% of women voted for Trump, and 53% of white women voted for Trump, right? In 2020, 42% of women voted for Trump, or so, whatever, 3.3%, not really significant, but whatever, it went higher. And the same with white women. It was over 50%, right? I already made my statements about Latin women, right? In 2020, Latin women voted 30% for Biden, but this year they voted 38% for Trump. So, I don't want to, and I know some people have made some statements about like black women and black men. Those numbers have virtually remained the same since 2020.
Yes,
so that's not really a thing there. But this is what I'm saying though. Like, if women are going to vote for Trump, this was the case in 2016. I mean, we all remember this, right? Where in 2016, women voted for Trump more than they did white women voted more for Trump than they did for Clinton. It was 52-43. It was 55-44 last term with Biden, and it's 53-45. So why do I bring up white women? Well, I bring up white women because white women make up the highest voting bloc in the United States. There's 37% of voters are white women. When you combine white men and white women, that's 71% of the voting bloc. So when you're looking at this and you're saying, wait a minute, 55% are voting for Trump. I mean, this is something that people have to take into account. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so I guess there is a question of the turnout there, like how many women stayed home.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this is the third time that Trump's been on the ballot. So my assumption is that most women who were repelled by Trump's character and the fact that he wants to grab them by the pussy, quote unquote, has already been baked in. I think that's the thing. Like, he's not shocking anymore.
No.
So you have a lot of women who already have been alienated from the Republican Party, who have moved to the Democratic Party in 2016, 2020. Then the question this time is, okay, well, my two options are, Harris, Walz, or Trump, Vance. Who's going to be better for my pocketbook? And I think my guess is that the swing, it is, I guess one could say it's somewhat surprising that given the way that Harris ran her campaign, you didn't have a swing toward her.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think it probably is. It's the two factors. One, that the women who are repelled by Trump are already out of the Republican Party, or at least they're not voting for him.
Mm-hmm.
And two, the just general environment, this perception of a bad economy, high inflation, prices increasing, some disorder and chaos at the border, that's somewhat alienating. And probably, like most people, even in the suburbs, they just want to have their to be left alone and to have a decent economy and feel like their life is improving year to year. That would be my guess. And it will be interesting to see why the messaging just didn't seem that effective.
Yeah, I mean, again, just kind of looking at the numbers here on this, it's really fascinating. Black women make up 7%. That's been unchanged. They voted 4% for Trump in 16, 9% for Trump in 2020, 7% this time. Okay, pretty standard.
Yeah.
White women, as I've said, 52% voted for Trump in 16, 55% voted for Trump in 20, and 53% voted for Trump now. That's 37% of voters. Latina women, 25% voted for Trump in 16 with a woman on the ballot. 30% voted for Trump in 2020, and 38% voted for Trump in 2024. So you're seeing a 13% jump with Latin women in 8 years, and they make up just as many numbers of voters as black women. So if black women stay the same in how they vote, but you have a 13% jump with Latin women in 8 years, and then you have white women overwhelming. So the reason I'm staying on this is because white women make up most of the highest voting block, 37%. And then you have a smaller voting block of women, Latin women, but they've increased 13% in voting for the same fucking guy. And so, and you, in those 3 cycles, you had a white woman on the ticket, doesn't seem to matter. And then you had a black woman on the ticket, and 8 years later, doesn't matter. In fact, it increased. And so it's like this idea, this fiction of, well, everyone's just sexist. Well, then you need to go and tell women that, I mean, women can also be sexist as well, of course, but it's like women voting for a woman does not equal. Like Democrats have to see that as, hey, you're more likely, kind of what you're saying, to vote for your pocketbook, to vote for economic issues, to vote for other things. But you cannot. That's why I really disagreed with Biden when he was running this. And I know the Harris campaign did it. I'm not saying you can't do it, but just putting so hard the reproductive freedoms thing and everything, like that's a good thing to campaign on. And it obviously did very well in 22, but midterms are way different than presidential elections. And I think can't just rely on that. You have to talk about economy.
And further, I think it's not whether the candidate is male or female. It's the women do have some of the same broad cultural concerns that men do. Working class women, rural women identify more with the Republican Party, regardless of who's at the top of the ticket. Right. And I think the reproductive rights is interesting because it appears to be the case that this time the move by Trump and Vance to moderate on this issue was successful, right? That a lot of women voted for reproductive rights, but also for Trump. They decoupled the state level ballot initiatives from the national environment. And see, that's another thing that was different with 2022 is that there wasn't a national environment, right? So it's an open question, like if the Dobbs decision came down in 2023,
right?
Because certainly Whitmer, for example, got a boost in Michigan because of the ballot initiative there.
Yeah.
But I just think this time there was Trump repeatedly said he wasn't going to do a national ban, that it was a state's issue. I think voters believed it. They were like, yeah, okay. And in fact, interestingly, here in Missouri, the ballot, the reproductive rights amendment passed quite easily.
Yep.
And Josh Hawley also curb stomped his opponent.
Yep.
So again, it was just people split. They didn't. And also important, I think it's important, like the people who were doing these initiatives for reproductive rights, they were very deliberate about not making it partisan. All of the advertising here that I got about Amendment 3, none of it linked it with the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
This is separate. This is about reproductive rights. That's something, it's about freedom. Everyone cares about that. It's not a democratic issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in theory, that's a good thing. It is an issue. It shouldn't be a right or left issue, but yeah, I mean, that's part of it. I mean,
Yeah, and shouldn't.
Go ahead.
I personally, I'm actually quite happy that this is not a partisan issue, and that we now see there's this equilibrium in different states where the will of the voters is getting heard, and the will is almost everywhere pro reproductive rights, at least in moderate form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and the fact that, I mean, the Republican Party has moderated on that seems like good. You're trying to appeal to the median voter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Nikki Haley was pretty moderate in the primaries on this issue. I mean, I think she just got it. I mean, so yeah, I mean, there's something interesting there. I mean, I'll just say before we go to kind of ballot measures, just something about a few things about the demographics. Yeah, so there's a whole thing to be said about young people, especially young men. But again, this isn't 2007, 2008, where it's Obama and you have a very charismatic, likable, reaching out to young people kind of campaign that was. It's not that. And look, there's a whole, you and I have talked about this, offline about, this is kind of the Richard Reeves thing about this kind of crisis with young men, right? There's a serious issue with men not being able to get gainful employment, not going to work or to school, excuse me, kind of these issues of despair, staying at home way so long, you're not motivated, and just looking at the world outside. And this isn't to try and make young men or whatever victims. It's really a serious issue. So I just think when that plays out politically, we're talking about kind of like what kind of man do they look up to or whatever. But this is the frustrating thing. And we'll talk about this when we talk about what Democrats can do. But the frustrating thing for me is, look, you have to go where people are, not where you want them to be. And if young men are listening to Rogan, they're listening to Huberman, they're listening to Theo Vaughn, they're listening to, Flagrant, they're listening to all these bro podcasts, you got to fill up that space. And you got to show that disagreement. You got to show, look, we have a different way of this. If you never talk to people where they're at, how are they going to hear it? They're not turning on Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel and all these other places that people live. They're not reading the New York Times. They're not doing that, right? So you can't assume young people Democrat, just like you can't assume Latinos Democrat. Black folks the Democrats have to get away from that because they're just going to absolutely never win elections again.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is, I think, objectively the case that over the last 30 years, the United States, the culture and our institutions and the economy has become more favorable toward traditionally feminine type values. I mean, that's the care economy. People who are going into social work, counseling, nursing, K through 12 teaching, and a lot of the behaviors and kind of virtues that we associate with traditional masculinity are are not rewarded. You get punished for them. And these men, especially men who are not particularly do not have particularly high cognitive ability, but who are, let's say, they like joining a coalition. They could do like, masculine type labor. They could get a job at a factory or mining or doing extractive industries or whatever it would be. They're at a real disadvantage, and their relatives.
It's not even that it's not encouraged, things like that. It's actually, this was, again, I'm not saying I entirely disagree with it, but you saw this from many of these types of organizations or these industries where not only was it saying that there's not a place or it's kind of phased out, but that to have traditional masculine kinds of values was toxic masculinity.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's not even the fact that it's saying that it's a bug. Like it's a complete deformity of sorts, right? And look, right. there is some things to be said about some of the uglier sides of traditional masculinity. I'm not disagreeing with that. I think that there's some space with this, that yes, there is some toxicity. I'm not denying some of that, but to completely generalize that and to say to be masculine in this way, because when you start asking, well, how do you define that? It's just masculinity, and there is a spectrum of what different dudes can be into different things, just like it is for women. I mean, but to really demonize it that way is this backlash.
I'm not the most masculine of guys or anything, but I don't think about being 20 and like egging people's houses, telling like inappropriate jokes, getting in stupid fights with people, being a part of like a male coalition, being into sports and video games. I mean, this is men being men. Are there negative aspects to that? Yes. Should there be constraints on that kind of behavior? Of course. But when you go too far, you're just going to alienate people. And again, you can hate traditional masculinity all you want, but my question is, well, do you want to win an election?
I mean, that's literally how I frame it as well. It's like, you got to go where people are at, and you can't go and try and change people by telling them how a part of how they identify is completely defective and it's immoral and it's this and it's that. Like, no one wants to listen to, and no group wants to hear anybody talk down to them like that. Whether it's true or not, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so that's a big problem, I think.
Furthermore, when you become more feminized and puritanical about this, you get a backlash where you do actually get a full-scale embrace of a lot of aspects of masculinity that are toxic, right? Both to society and to these males who are behaving this way and getting rewarded for it. But it's like, it's understandable.
Yeah,
it's totally understandable. So I think even if we're thinking about the well-being of men between 18 and 29, let's be a little bit more realistic about what a healthy masculinity would look like. I would say, again, this view that like, I heard a lot of people do this, like Walls represents like this different kind of this actual positive masculine. No, he doesn't.
No. You need to ask the people that are listening to Theo Von and Rogan and all these places, and they're on a Discord server and they're playing Fortnite. Go ask them if they think how Tim Walz. Again, I'm not trying to pick on Tim Walz, but whatever. No, he's being used as an example. Ask them what they think.
Yeah, Mark Kelly. He's a fucking astronaut. He's been in space. He was in the army or military.
Right.
That's a guy who you'd say that's a morally upright dude who has a lot of aspects of traditional masculinity. Tim Walz, no. Just because you're kind of weird and effeminate and you pheasant hunt doesn't mean you're a man.
Right.
Males aren't looking at that and being like, how can I be more like Tim Walz?
Yeah, right. And you don't have to like it, but again, do you want to win elections? You have
That's exactly right.
You have to figure that out.
And furthermore, like even like Barack Obama, like, yes, he doesn't embody like the more traditional masculinity, but it is a kind of masculine type role model where you're like, yeah, this is this like family man, high IQ, right? Like
confident, driven, determined.
Yes, he could absolutely smash somebody in a debate because he knows his shit. He's competent.
Right.
Tim Walz.
And he can hit a 3-pointer, on any given day.
Right. Whereas Tim Walz goes into a debate with J.D. Vance and he just gets absolutely eviscerated.
Oh, my God.
Because he's incompetent. He's not erudite. Nope. He's not quick on his feet. So, yes, Democrats have lost the plot on that for sure.
Again, it's where you want it. It's where you're at. Not, if you want to get to where you want to be at, you got to start with where you're at. Is kind of how I see it.
Yes.
So with the ballot measures real quick, easy one here on weed, as it is every election. So at the moment, there are 24 states where recreational marijuana is legal. That is half the country. You can smoke your weed to your heart's content legally, right?
Yes.
It's basically New England, Mid-Atlantic, aside from PA. and then the West Coast, and then a few places in between, even places like Missouri.
Missouri is legal.
But Florida said nope. And it was more of it didn't meet the necessary threshold to pass, but it didn't pass.
Yeah.
So it's not legal there for recreational use. And then the Dakota said nope, pretty handsomely. So whatever, those are the three states. Now, interesting here that we've talked about this, and this is what's really interesting. Abortion. So this is something that was in the discussion leading up to the election. So I'll run through these real quick. It's very fascinating. Arizona, yes, constitutional right, 61%. Colorado, yes, 62%. Florida, they said nope. Florida was like 6 weeks. It's like, hey, women don't even know if they're pregnant at 6 weeks, right? I mean, it was so harsh in Florida. I mean, it's but
it wasn't a real. I mean, that was a very liberal proposal, right? And
yes,
it almost beat the threshold. I think it got 57%.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
and it needed to get 60. So it's I would say that tells you that Floridians are well within like the mainstream of what Americans generally think about abortion.
I'm going to come to this in a minute, but because I think it's important to note. Okay, so Maryland, my home state, of course, we made this constitutional right. 75% of us said that.
Oh wow,
yeah. Missouri, 52%, but it did pass, right? Did pass. Yeah. Montana, yes, 57%. Interesting. Nebraska said, Nebraska's interesting. Ban abortions after first trimester, 55% said yes for, but they voted against it being a constitutional right at 51%. Very interesting. Nevada, yes, 64%. New York expanded the rights, and then South Dakota said nope. So overwhelmingly, you're seeing in red states, blue states, that most people are making abortion a constitutional right, and pretty handsomely. It's usually a solid 50%, in some places 60+%, if you will. I just want to make a point on abortion. I know a lot of people have different ideas about this and all that stuff in terms of like timing. And many people will look to Europe as a kind of like, very liberal and very, modern and cosmopolitan. And I just want to be clear on this. In most European countries, it is usually at the low end 10 weeks, at the high end 24 weeks. But it's like, so for example, it's 12 weeks in Germany and Italy, and it's 14 weeks in France and Spain. Right. And I can't remember the Scandinavian countries, but I think it's also about 12, 14 weeks. So, I think that's important to keep in mind, because when people, actually, I'm looking at it now. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Almost every Western European country, Germany, Italy, France, Greece, Switzerland, Ukraine, all the Denmark, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Ireland, 12 weeks. It's 10 weeks in Portugal. It's 18 in Sweden, 14 in Spain and Austria, 22 in Holland, and 24 in the UK. So this is Europe. This is all of Europe. It's about 12 weeks. That's about the mean average.
Right.
So, I know that we have a history here in Roe v. Wade, but I think if people are trying to say, if you're trying to build things here, I'm fine with it being fully legal at any point, but it is not crazy extremism. We're in a handmaid's tale. If a state wants to put 12 or 14 weeks, that's literally how it is in Europe. That's literally what it is. Yes. So
I completely agree. I think that's a completely reasonable, justifiable position. I think the 6 weeks seems to me a bit on the extreme side.
Too much. I would agree with that.
My guess is this is basically the last election where abortion is a national issue.
I say pretty prominently. It might stick around in 26, seeing how some of these things take effect and how people, maybe a little, but I'd say yes, I would agree.
Yeah, I think the sort on that has pretty much happened, and it's not, let's say this, at the national level, it's definitely not an issue that, unless the Republicans in this administration get a little bit crazy, it's just not something that the Democrats are going to be able to use.
Well, and that's the thing is you can't keep running on this, right? You can't keep running on this because it's not going to be something that's there. But I mean, when you look at it, abortion is legal in all of New England, much of the Midwest, or large parts of the Midwest, definitely the West Coast. I mean, it really, unfortunately, is the South where, it's not legal or doesn't have any provision. So, I think, and what I'm looking at here, I don't think it's been updated. Yeah. So Missouri, it's now legal.
Yes.
And so some of these things have been updated.
It's a significant win here. Like in the one city, I believe, that had a Planned Parenthood, Columbia, where the University of Missouri is, that was shut down. And I'm happy to see that get back up and running and helping women. Interesting thing also, when I was here in grad school, when you still had Roe v. Wade, the Planned Parenthood in downtown Columbia would get protested like every day. Every day. It was really motivating for people. So it'd be interesting to see if it's still getting protested. And by the way, I mean, I'm fine with people doing peaceful protests. That's obviously,
that's right.
That's good. It's just, it's interesting with Roe v. Wade, that seemed to motivate a lot of people on the right for understandable reasons, in the pro-life movement. Interested to see post Roe with this, just it will seem to Missourians like it's more legitimate because it was decided by a Democratic vote. So my guess is you won't get as much protest anymore, that it'll just be kind of accepted.
Yeah, I think that's right. So real quick, voting rights was really interesting. I was mentioning this to you before we started. So it's an interesting thing. This kind of goes into like the idea of like immigration and stuff, which we'll talk about in terms of what the second Trump term is going to do. But 9 states, pretty handsomely, 2/3 or higher, voted to require citizenship, proof of citizenship, to vote. In Idaho, it was 65%, Iowa, 77%, Kentucky, 62%, Michigan, 68%, North Carolina, 77%, Ohio, 80%, Oklahoma, 81%, South Carolina, 86%, Wisconsin, 70%. This is not voter ID. This is, you need to prove you are a citizen, birth certificate or whatever. That's, I mean, those are, at least 2/3 in almost all those 9 states. And this is, again, southern states, red states, but it's also the, quote unquote, blue wall and some, North Carolina, some of these bluish or purplish sorts of states in some ways. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, to make that a requirement, you're registering to vote, you got to prove you're a citizen.
But the thing is, like, honestly, I just don't really have a hot take on it. What I would say is, lacking an opinion myself, I can definitely see how a normie person, if somebody tells you, hey, should you have to prove that you're a citizen to be able to vote? I can see how a normie would be like, well, yeah, of course. Why shouldn't you? Right. So my guess is it's not an example of like xenophobia or
no.
It's just, it seems kind of common sense almost, even if it's not.
I think it is a little bit. So I've had this discussion with some friends of mine. I am very open and willing to have I think the country should have a discussion or a debate generally on voter ID. I think that that's a fair thing. I think if it's done, without all the kind of like sort of racial trappings of sorts and making it where it's really difficult for, the grandma that lives at home and, doesn't have an ID because she's 97 and like, well, she can't vote now. There's those maybe edge cases. I don't know how often that is, but yes, generally, I think voter ID is, it's a good thing to discuss and debate. But this seems a little bit more of that, right? Like you're saying, like, yeah, fuck ID. Let me see your papers, right? let me see your birth certificate. Let me see like your citizenship or your passport. I don't know. I mean, I don't have like any. Yeah, I don't think it's xenophobic, but it does seem to be an added kind of obstacle for something that has. I mean, we're not seeing gross negligence where we're seeing non-citizens voting. So what's my question here is like, what's driving this? And so overwhelmingly, like, why? Like, is this just going to be harder for some people? Like, I mean, some people might not have a passport. You got to get a passport to vote now, or you've lost your birth certificate. Ah, shit, I got to go and order a new one and whatever. I mean, that's true for a lot of people. And if they don't have that, that means they can't vote. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what I'm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
well,
I'm not going to like go and protest on it, but.
And I would say, like, to the extent that the Republican Party is appealing to less educated, more, like more marginal voters, it seems like it would actually hurt them.
Yes, yeah. When I was reading this, I was like, this might hurt them, especially in Iowa or Idaho or,
Yeah, that's what I would think. Because I part of the issue there is I don't think Democrats are particularly incensed about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, and so it's like, okay, what's what's going to happen here?
Right.
So let's move on to, we've kind of talked a lot of the election stuff. Let's talk about just kind of quick, with both what a second Trump term is going to look like, and what Democrats could do in the future. So with Trump, okay, so he's there 4 years. Man. Okay. What's your biggest concern or fear with a second Trump term? What are your biggest concerns here?
I mean, my overall biggest concern is the general institutional degradation and corruption that is going to occur within Trump 2.0 without a lot of the guardrails that were in place in the first administration. Just now, my view is that it's like the variance in this term is huge. It could be basically the first term. It could be an utter disaster. I honestly, I just don't know what to expect, like, overall. But I would be concerned. I think that the influence of populism on institutions is pretty much uniformly negative. Trump is a terrible manager. He's a terrible executive. He's venal. He is only thing that his North Star is loyalty.
Yep.
Loyalty to him. And that means that, some bad things could happen. I am concerned about the deportations that he relishes in, this kind of like show of force and violence and this kind of shock and awe. We're going to clean out the cities, get rid of the internal enemy and the vermin. And that goes too far, and you have some violence, and you have protests, and then he, let's say, activates the National Guard, and it gets very ugly. That's not unrealistic to me. Yeah.
So I would, per usual, we mostly agree on all this stuff. I firmly agree with everything you're saying there. I think the biggest thing for me, yes, I'm very worried about our institutions. I'm very worried about that. And I like institutions because you have a country of 350 million people, biggest economy in the world. You can't do this with, 50 plus different ways of doing it by states. Like, you need a cohesive federal government with big institutions. So, I'm worried about our courts with a bunch of loyalists. I'm worried about that and our judicial system. I'm worried about Department of Justice. I'm worried about, I'm very worried about, this isn't a fair play here. This isn't a Trump thing, but, Republicans have been wanting to dismantle and totally shut down the Department of Education. I don't know what that looks like. If they shut that down, let's just over the summer, where do kids go to school? Like, people cannot pay for private school and homeschool their kids. Like, that's just not, like, what happens? Like, I really don't know. Not to mention higher ed. So state schools aren't getting any funds. Like, they're just not going to be operating. Like, everyone's got to go to a private school. Like, and we can't just, like, well, fuck it. We burned it down and we'll figure it out when we do it afterwards. Like, that's not a plan. Like, and that has literally huge impact. I mean, they haven't talked about reforming it or making some changes. No, it's, we're going to shut down department. Like, that has been, like, Rick Perry was talking about that in 2016 primaries. Like, that's been a Republican thing. What happens? Like, I really don't know.
I think most of the control then, or almost all of the control over schools and the curricula and so on, to states, right?
Yeah, but that's going to be, I mean, most people will know this, right? With education, you get, federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars. That's just going to put an absolute burden on every state. And some states are going to do worse and some states might do okay, but that's just not feasible.
Yeah. And just the general degradation of these institutions and the emphasis on loyalty instead of competence is a real problem, right? And I mean, Trump has on multiple occasions attacked the Federal Reserve. Right?
Yeah. He hasn't at the moment, but there's a long history of him doing that. We don't need the Federal Reserve and all that.
Yeah, if you have the view, the true unitary executive view, then the Federal Reserve shouldn't be an independent agency and it should basically operate at the behest of the president. And that very much concerns me, right? Like,
of course, yeah.
Say we went through this period with high inflation where the Federal Reserve increased interest rates from essentially zero to about 5.5%. Biden didn't say anything. He didn't make a chirp about it.
Right.
What happens if during that period, as Recep Erdogan did in Turkey, where he basically just forced their central bank to keep interest rates artificially low? What if Trump decided to do something like that? Then you get inflation that's not 9%, it's 15, 20%. Now,
well, Turkey still has inflation that is over 60%. The lira is fucked.
Yes. Yeah, this is what happens when you don't have functional institutions. Things can get really bad really quickly. Now, obviously, there are flaws with any institution, and people can debate whether the Federal Reserve put the brakes on too hard or whatever. But I have a lot of confidence that Jerome Powell really cares about maintaining reasonably low unemployment and price stability. I don't have any confidence that Trump cares about price stability. He cares about juicing the economy.
Yeah.
So like, in the Department of Justice, obviously, I mean, who's going to be his attorney general? How much of a lick spittle is that person going to be? I think these are very realistic concerns.
I mean, with the AG, I mean, some of the names that have been floated is, Jeff Clark, Mike Lee from Utah, and John Ratcliffe.
Yes.
I mean, it's like these aren't
nobody. They're not instilling confidence. That's for sure.
These are loyalists. That's what it is.
And the tariffs. I mean, frankly, if you run a dual policy of mass deportations, closed border, and 10 to 20% across the board tariffs, you're going to get inflation. It is inevitable. Prices will increase.
Not only will you get inflation, you're also going to get, so this is a difference, the price of goods is going to go up, right? Those are two separate things, but that's going to go up. You're going to have supply chain issues. You're going to be paying way more for things if you have a across the board 20% tariff, because even if you are charging more for a foreign country or for goods, you as the taxpayer are going to be paying for that. It is not the other person that is paying for that. You pay for that more.
I think the empirical evidence is pretty clear that consumers shoulder almost 100% of the tariff. It's passed through. Yeah. So, to me, it even if he successfully accomplishes his agenda, his promised agenda to his voters, that's really bad. right?
Well, it's bad because I mean, think about something like, again, something like with what he's done with the media and journalists. And, again, Republicans are kind of, cosplaying, like they're these big free speech advocates. But oh my goodness, as soon as there's one thing they don't like, all of a sudden it's, we got to shut this down. We got to put a ban. But, they're big free speech people. How do you have a president that's so for free speech, but he's not letting journalists come in, or he's removing their credentials, or as he recently stated a week or two before the election, looking at the set 98 Alien Sedition Acts. And it's just like, what? Like, I mean, so you can't say anything offensive to the president, because if you do, you could get penalized.
These people completely flipped out over the euthanization of Peanut the squirrel, who was apparently being held illegally in the city of New York. You could argue about the bureaucratic overreach there. I don't know the specific details. I don't want to opine. But clearly it was the case that it was illegal to have the squirrel. Okay, now, how can you simultaneously bitch about that as an infringement upon your freedom while advocating mass deportations and going into businesses and homes to have people show their papers and document that they're actually here legally? I mean, to me, that is a civil liberties issue. Now, again, people are here illegally. That's an issue. I don't know exactly the best way to deal with that or how you adjudicate each of these individual cases. But I know that preparing to deport millions of people is going to be a civil liberties nightmare.
Well, it's a civil liberties nightmare, 100%, of course. But again, that is, you could talk about the humanity and morals of that. Okay. But leaving all that aside, it doesn't work. It's expensive to deport people. It's extreme. You need materials, you need manpower, you have all the sorts of bandwidth you need to do it in certain places. And then, what kinds of temporary facilities, let's not call them internment camps, but, okay. And it's like, until you figure out, you don't just dump them across into Mexico. That's going to be an issue. You can't just dump them off into, certain Central American countries.
There are real serious logistic issues there. And I saw one estimate was that it cost $88,000 to deport one individual.
Yeah. But look, one individual. But then here's the thing. If you are going hard on this, you're going to businesses and you're going to say, and look, we're not just talking about illegals, quote unquote. He's also talking about, people with green cards or people on TPS or people on certain student or work visas. And it's like, look, if you start with like, okay, the person that is illegal and has 3 felonies, fine. But it is one of those things though, where it's like, if you keep going with that, you're going to have problems in all of your hospitality and all of your hard labor industries, right?
Yeah.
Agriculture, housing, hotels, restaurants, all these things. You are going to, if they're all of a sudden, a sizable portion of your workforce is gone because they were deported, legally or not, who's going to work there? And then all of a sudden, if you've got people working and you're not getting enough applicants for new places, then the consumer is going to have to pay more for that hotel stay. They're going to have to pay more for getting the fucking cheeseburger at the restaurant. You're going to have, you know what I mean? And even the price of when you go to the grocery store and it's like, well, we don't have another truck from all the tomatoes and all of the other, things that are being grown because no one's picking them. What about housing? No one's there building all these. You know what I mean? It's just, it's so financially expensive.
There's one study that I read on Secure Communities, the program that was rolled out. It was, it would go county to county and it was rolled out across the United States over a few years when Barack Obama was president. And they looked at what effect did this have on the housing market. And it
Mhm.
led to fewer homes being built,
Right.
homes that it increased the price of the home.
Mhm.
And then there was a shift from building more affordable housing toward building larger homes. Because of course, if your profit margin is lower, you can't build, reasonably affordable smaller homes.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's just secure communities. I think in total, it was like something like 400,000 individuals who were deported through the 6 years that it was in existence.
Mhm.
So yeah, like we can debate whether or not it's a good thing to be reliant upon illegal immigrants in residential construction and agriculture and like light
Hospitality
manufacturing,
and
food transport. Yeah,
right.
but we are. That's
Right.
the reality. So if you're going to do something like this, there are going to be obviously economic consequences, and I don't think most working class people will enjoy paying more for food, for hotels,
Right. Right.
for
Because things are already not
services.
cheap, and so you all of a sudden you're having this, and it's like, well, but we got all the illegals out, and it's like, okay, like how does that make any sense? And look, I mean, if it does happen, I mean, you can only go on what someone says, and Trump has said there's no price tag. It's gonna whatever it costs, right? He
Yes.
said that that they're gonna have the largest mass deportation in our country's history. Like those are his words.
Yes.
Like you got to take people what
Yes.
they say,
So
and I'll just say because he won the popular vote and the electoral
yes.
college, and he's got a full conservative Supreme Court, a House, and a Senate. He has a mandate. This is literally what
Yes.
people. If immigration was the number 2 issue after the economy, he's
Yes.
going to do that and
Yes.
feel justified.
Yes. I think that they are going to make a serious attempt to do uh, pretty intense deportation program. And I guess my hope is, the American people will witness it and be very disturbed by it, and there will be a thermostatic reaction in the other direction. That's my personal hope.
Right.
Obviously, difficult to say. What we can say is that attitudes toward immigration improved after Trump was elected the first time because there
Mm-hmm.
was a thermostatic reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, I assume that that's going to happen, but again, not sure. And, for a lot of people, like something like 70-80% of people who are here illegally have a family member, at least one family member who's here legally, who's a
Oh,
citizen of the US.
so I know people that have lived here 15 years. They don't have papers for whatever reason. They got kids in college.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that in the near term, that's my most immediate concern is that they roll this out and it gets pretty ugly, and there's some maybe violence in a few urban areas where you get some protests or a few people are killed. ICE, some
Yeah.
uses excessive force.
Yeah.
That's not. It's
I mean,
not humane.
no, I mean, it's not I mean, I think personally, I think this happens first 6 months after the inauguration. There's going to be
Yeah, I would
there's big
imagine.
push right away,
Very plausible. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So real quick,
So,
just
yeah.
last bit of this here. I mean, we could spend 3 hours. I mean, just absolutely talking shit about, our own side of things, our own, party, the Democrats, and, good moderate liberals that we are, have been banging this drum for years. And it feels like I'm yelling into the void half the time. But what do they do? Okay, first thing is, real quick, is do they finally take this and say, we fucked this up and we need to really reset on everything? No more blue wall, no more working class. We aren't for any of that. Not even with Latinos. Like, we need a hard reset. We're not going to do the woke speak. We're not going to go and do all of this, like, crazy swing to the left. Are they going to do any of that? Or is it just going to be this country's racist and sexist, and that's why they didn't vote for a black woman. That's why they didn't vote for a white woman in 16. That's why, all of these things are going to happen. That's all it is. And it's all those. Are they going to listen to some of what the results are? Or do you think they're just going to double down more and go further left?
I think, there will obviously be some individuals, especially those who are ensconced within higher education, who will take from this the lesson that the United States is irredeemably racist and sexist. I actually do think, though, the people in the Democratic Party who care about the Democratic Party, the leaders in the party, they get it. They know that being perceived as completely out of touch, as priggish and overly woke and concerned with, language and policing all kinds of just normal, male behaviors is not successful. And especially you've completely lost rural America.
Completely. 100%.
And you're at danger of losing a lot of urban America because you can't govern worth a shit when you do take power. Right?
I think the suburbs are also not completely there. Look, when we were talking about this, it was everything, every demographic. It was Asians. Native Americans made up 1%, but 65% went for Trump.
Yes.
So it was Asians, Native Americans. We've obviously talked a lot about Latinos. We've talked about white folks. It's the only demographic that is for Democrats at this point, whether you like it or not, generally is upper middle class, highly educated elites. That's it.
Yes. My personal view, it's hard to prognosticate these things, but right now I would say what I would like to see is a return to Clintonism. Let's do a pro-growth, competent governance, build, deregulate, make permitting easier, do all kinds of zoning reforms, things that are inexpensive, by the way. That's another thing that's positive about this YIMBY abundance agenda. It doesn't cost money to just allow people to build. Right? Yeah. Let's just be competent, do competent, good governance, do the things that you do well, provide goods and services to people, make a safe, secure, orderly seeming environment in New York City, right? People go to Chicago, they feel safe. They're not getting accosted by people. It's a nice family experience. Or if you're living there, you don't have to worry about taking the L train and you're going to get accosted or have to witness vulgarities, just quality of life, stick to the brass tacks here. I really think in this sense, both Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro, I think, are people who I would look to. Josh Shapiro's the get shit done, right? That's what he's focused on. You fix the I-95 bridge in 12 days. It was back up and running. That's what people want. With Gretchen Whitmer, it's fix the damn roads. I would have some criticisms of her for COVID, but whatever, that's done.
Yeah, it's 5 years ago now, almost.
Right. You're still you're a moderate, pragmatic governor. You have this good slogan. And
a slightly progressive streak when you need it on some things, but it's not the central piece of who you are. Fetterman is also, I think, somebody that at least pre-stroke, was blue collar, working class, outside Pittsburgh, was a mayor. He's got his own progressive streak, but it's not the centrality of who he is. My governor, Wes Moore, was in, the military. He was in private sector with business, et cetera. There is a bench here. Right?
Yeah. And it's just laser focus on this. So expand the supply side, get the cost of everyday life down, college, healthcare, housing. these things are groceries. Like groceries,
Right.
there's probably less. I mean, that's, there are some things that you can do, but especially on housing,
Hmm.
healthcare, and college and childcare, by the
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
So just focus on it's like, look, like we're going to get the cost of living down. We're going to expand the supply side. We're not going to spend a bunch of money irresponsibly. I really do think like, that era of the Democratic Party got killed by post-COVID inflation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, look, we spent $6 trillion over a few years, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be some, in my view, fiscal rectitude, especially because we know that's not going to occur in the Trump years.
That's not even close.
Right. So there's a good chance that if the Democrats take the White House in 2028, that we're going to be staring at a budget deficit of like 3 trillion or 2.5 trillion and overall debt of like 40 trillion. Okay. So yeah, like I don't think big spending on social programs is going to be viable,
Yeah.
but definitely like providing, competent, good governance, laying off of the woke shit, having a secure, I actually am very favorable toward immigration, especially a lot of high skilled immigration. But that's an issue where, look, like there has to be democratic accountability. If people are dead set against high levels of low skilled immigration, I don't think you can do it. You need a secure border regardless. That
Yeah.
would be my view.
Yeah.
Look, rule of law is important.
Yeah.
If you have people coming into the country illegally, you're degrading rule of law. I
Yeah.
think to
Well,
me, it's,
and this doesn't need to be a Republican issue, right? Like this is what's so
yeah,
frustrating is
I agree.
people only listen to Democrat or Republicans because they're the only ones talking about it. Democrats had no policy, no platform on this
Well, their
whatsoever.
policy in the 2020 primaries was basically decriminalize any border crossing.
Yeah. And like, that's
Like,
not,
get fucked.
yeah,
Seriously, like, oh,
that's
here's
not the
our
way to do it.
platform. Defund the police, decriminalize border crossings, and give surgeries to transgender illegal.
Right. Right. But here's the thing. Here's why this is important though, is this is by every objective metric, whether people feel that way or not, this is the best economy right now in the world, without a doubt.
Yes.
And when I talk to people and I look at the numbers, and you look at when that window opens for HB1 visas and student visas, you get 80,000 people that they're going to take on the lottery system, 500,000 applications, boom, right away that first hour.
Right.
Everyone wants to come here, right?
Yes.
Everybody wants to come here. That makes it even more prudent to say, how do we have a good, humane, but firm border policy that is counter to the reckless way in which Republicans do it, but you still do it in a way that's firm boundaries, very strictly enforced, but it is humane. And you worry about folks here and bringing people here with a healthy vetting process. And then that way, because people aren't lining up to get into Holland or Sri Lanka or,
right.
They're not, I mean, maybe, but not like here. Everyone still wants to come here. And so you need to have even better laws for that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, for me, like, obviously, like, quality of life, that's the responsibility of government, providing rule of law, general quality of life issues, keeping people safe, etc. Nationally, like if we're thinking of like international affairs, clearly China is our biggest political competition over the next few decades. I want to win that. I want to be at the cutting edge and win with AI, quantum computing, biomanufacturing, aerospace, etc. Okay, well, to do that, you need to have everyone in the world looking at the United States and thinking, I want to be there.
Of course.
Right? We want all of the highest cognitive ability people from everywhere in the world to want to be here. That's my desideratum. And in order to have that, you have to have a secure border, because otherwise people become anti-immigrant pretty quickly.
Yeah. And what happens when you become anti-immigrant full stop across the board? Now you're not getting any of those people.
Yes, and then you elect people like Trump, and then
Right.
people around the world don't want to come here anymore.
Right. And this is a totally separate conversation, of course, but birth rates around the globe have plummeted.
Are plummeting, yes.
I mean, people don't get married. If they do, they get married in their late 20s, early 30s. And then if they have a kid, they're having one and that's it. And then many people do not have a kid, largely because of economic reasons, and also because, people are splintered everywhere around, the US or the globe. And so people don't have, mom down the street or, the aunt in the next town or whatever to help out. So people don't have kids. So it's like, okay, so you're not, and this all kind of becomes more and more complicated with social issues. But okay, if young people aren't having as many kids as they used to, I mean, that's definitely seen there in the data. And then you're saying you're going to have this almost draconian way of being anti-immigration.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? Like what's going to happen here?
Yeah, that's a contractionary set of policies. That's the opposite of an abundance agenda, right? So the fact is, the fertility rate in the United States is something like 1.61. Okay? Yeah, the labor market is shrinking. The population is aging. Would I like it if people all of a sudden started having 3.5 kids? Sure. I'm skeptical that there's any set of policies that could actuate that. And therefore, yes, like we need to have a relatively high amount of immigration to satisfy the needs of the labor market. And we need to continue to have the most talented people coming to the United States, so that you have, I want to maintain our absolute dominance on the production frontier of the tech sector. Right? Like I don't want China to have more powerful AI than we do. That seems to be pretty bad.
Yeah, of course. And you see this happening. Honestly, look, the last big comprehensive immigration reform we had was 1986, 38 years ago. There was a kind of a addendum to that, if you will, or kind of a renewal of that in 92. And that's it. That is what our current immigration laws are in this country, 30 plus years old, right?
Yes.
And things like, the border gets all the talk, and I get that, but really the biggest issue is visas. And how do you make that better? Right? Like that has to be for people that want to come here, and it is high skilled people, but it is, nurses and teachers and stuff like that. You do want those folks here too. And it's like, why are we not having mandatory e-verify and big penalties for companies that do hire in the wrong way? You do have to reward people that do hire but we don't have an infrastructure for that because people aren't doing that. It's been on the table for, 30 years. We don't do it.
Yeah. There are a lot of actual issues of implementation and technical wonky issues to sort out. But my overall view is, immigration is something you want it to be in the national interest. And that means, I think, titrated to the needs of the labor market overall. And that's both, for example, there's huge shortages in home health aides, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to do that? How are you going to provide abundant, cheap childcare without a lot of foreign-born workers? You're not.
Yeah.
You're not.
No.
But the thing is, a lot of this is on the Biden administration. You let a disaster occur on the border. The consequences of that are eminently predictable. People are going to become more willing to hear a nativist message when that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
So
I mean,
yes.
and this isn't just a U.S. thing. You see this all across the globe.
Oh, yes,
in
yes.
many countries.
Yes.
You see this everywhere. It's the same problem. I mean, Germany has the same problem. I mean, they're an aging population. They have problems with their immigration since 2015. You know, there's all these issues, and then you get this. You know, AfD party now gets 20% of the vote in their parliament. It's just this isn't a new thing or a uniquely U.S. thing. I do think the difference is we're a big country. We have the strongest economy, and there are some very old things that we need to do. So all that said, Ben, you've been so nice with your time. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but just give me your last thoughts on the election and where we're going. And yeah, just kind of sum it up for us. What's your kind of last kind of final word here?
My final word is twofold. One, I do hope that the Democrats learn the correct lessons from this, and that there is a shift away from the cultural elitism and wokeism, and a move toward this moderate center there, and a move toward a more abundance type agenda. My second take, this is the hot take, I'm sticking by it. I still think, even though it looks good for the Republicans and Trump massively underperformed what you would have expected given the overall economic environment and the numbers about people saying the country was going in the wrong direction. And that makes it even more painful for the Democrats that you get this, like reasonably weak candidate, and you make a series of mistakes that allows him to win this election. Now, I'm willing to. Well, also, final thing I would say is very curious to see what happens with the MAGA movement post-Trump. That's something that I'm very much going to Is it Vance? Do they have a falling out? What happens? Yeah, very interested to see this.
Yeah, me as well. Well, Ben, thanks so much. Always, this is so much fun. I love talking about this stuff with you all the time, and we'll keep talking about it, and we'll see where it evolves.
All right, sounds good, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.